Go Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Yao Mega Revolution. And Trump is halting aid to Zelensky just as Putin unleashes hell on Ukraine everywhere, all over Ukraine. Before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. Well, first we'll start with, let's just hear what is Trump doing and what's going on with Europe. And then I'm going to get into what they're hiding from you on the fake news, not showing you Ukraine is on fire.
That free speech platforms are under attack, which means we've seen Rumble be attacked in Brazil, in France. It's only a matter to do so. So support Rumble by using the code redacted and going to rumble.com/
on Zelensky's side. So we'll get to the latest here in a moment. But first, we're learning more about what happened during that explosive White House meeting last week. According to the Daily Caller, the meeting was supposed to go just as any state meeting would go. A quote, "This was set up to be like every other state visit," a senior aide reportedly recalled. "This was an Oval Office spray. They'd be cordial handshake, take a couple of questions, and then they'd have lunch." But then all hell broke loose. The plan went up in smoke when Zelensky arrived and immediately was sort of sticking to a script that it looked like he had. He might have had earlier meetings with Susan Rice, Victoria Nuland.
I know that little man, I know that 5-year-old girl was killed in Fort Worth, brother. And that's totally unacceptable, Nick. That's what I do know.
Before he arrived at the White House, telling him basically, don't go with this deal. Push for security guarantees. We want troops. We want weapons, which President Trump has repeatedly said he would not include in their mineral agreement. So why are you trying to torpedo this deal? You know what's in this thing. Then the fireworks went off in the Oval Office. And of course, we now know today, according to the Associated Press, Ukraine's Zelensky says the end of the war with Russia is very, very far away. To which Donald Trump responded, "This is the worst statement that could have been put up by Zelensky, and America will not put up with it for much longer." It's what I was saying. This guy doesn't want there to be peace as long as he has America's backing and Europe. In the meeting they had with Zelensky, stating flatly that they cannot do the job without the United States. Probably not a great statement to have been made in terms of a show of strength against Russia. What are they thinking? Trump said. Now, here are the warmongers that met this weekend. Of course, they all came together in Europe, in London. There's Zelensky.
Claire Daly is calling them a cover band for the Tony Blair warmongering efforts around the Iraq war. They're basically doing the same thing. They're lying to the world, actually, that stand with Ukraine is the new weapons of mass destruction, and they are trying to lead their people into a war. And again, we must remind ourselves that the people standing there, most of them have failed up. Ursula von der Leyen has never been elected by the people, was only named in elections after her party won. We're looking at, let's see, Antonio Costa, ousted for a Green Deal scandal in Portugal.
Mark
Rutte, who was ousted in the Netherlands as the leader there, promised to end his career in politics. These are the people who want war.
So Chris Rossini is the director of the Ron Paul Institute. He's been watching all of this very closely here as, of course, and co-host of the Liberty Report with Ron Paul and staunch advocates against actually going to war. And we're an anti-war show. So Chris, great to have you here on the show. Welcome in. I just want to get your sense of where do you think things sit today? We saw all the back and forth throughout the afternoon. President Trump basically threatening to cut off all aid to Ukraine. Europe embracing Zelensky, looking to put boots on the ground now in Ukraine. Where do you think things stand now?
Well, I'm actually kind of pleased. Not kind of. I'm very pleased to see that the president is going to halt weapons sales to Ukraine. This is long overdue. And ironically, it was Zelensky that pushed him over the edge, of all people. Right. I was no fan of, the mineral deals and keeping a foothold in Ukraine, the most corrupt country in the world. We should just walk away from the place. And Zelensky is the one that helped to push that happen. So from that perspective, I'm very happy. And as far as Europe, while they are acting tough, but they always have their, well, we need the United States. Well, that's not going to happen. And they may, in the previous world wars, have had we've had their back, but this time is different. We're not looking for a nuclear war with Russia, with President Trump. Thank goodness he's the one that is in office and not Kamala Harris. So I think things are looking up after looking so dire for so long.
Well, I'm happy to hear your confidence. Fox News from the White House said that the word on the street is that nothing will happen unless Zelensky apologizes. And here's why I don't like it. It's almost like when your girlfriend has a boyfriend, you don't want them to be together. And you're like, don't take his calls, girl, because you know what's going to happen. You're just going to get back together. I don't want an apology from Zelensky. I don't want to thank you from Zelensky. I want this to end. So is this a way where Zelensky can sort of Eddie Haskell his way back and just sort of weasel his way back into a weapons deal?
I'm sure he feels like he's going to have to. I agree with you. I think we should cut the ties clean, and then peace will be forced to happen, because we have dragged this war out with our money and our weapons, and so many people have needlessly died on both sides, but especially Ukraine, because they're fighting a superpower. And they weren't able to prevail despite all the money and all the weapons and all the money that's gone that they can't find, so to speak. So to put an end to this, it just has to end. But politics is cronyism, and they want minerals and they want to leave American companies there. Just get out of there, because the place it's nothing but trouble for our country.
We're going to talk about Europe here in a few minutes with a couple of other guests, so I won't bother you with the European side of this too much. I do want to get your Washington perspective, specifically in the warmongers. Your co-host, Ron Paul, has dealt up against these warmongers for decades. And so it was reported that before Zelensky sat down with Trump, that this had already been ironed out, that warmongers like Victoria Nuland, Susan Rice had already gotten in his ear. The old Obama regime, the warmongers who wanted to keep this thing going, the military machine, basically told him to scuttle this thing from the beginning. Does that surprise you? And how much of a wall does Trump face to?
That's true. They should be tried for treason. They're colluding with a foreign state against the president of the United States. That's called treason. If that's true, and if it's true, Chuck Schumer sat down with him, a small hat, Chuck Schumer, powerful small hat. One of the powerful small hats in this world, Chuck Schumer. If he did that, that's treason. But see, they would say Trump is going after his political enemies. No, that is collusion. The Russian collusion, they lied on Trump. This is collusion with Ukraine to go against the president of the United States. He has the will of the Americans on his side. We said in that war.
Deal with these warmongers in Washington who might try to subvert him.
Absolutely.
Well, I mean, his first administration was hopefully a learning lesson for him. And it was a learning lesson for all of us, that you can't surround yourself with people that are at odds with your worldview. And if you want peace with Russia, you can't surround yourself with neocons that want war with either Russia, China, Iran, or anybody else. So I think perhaps he has learned his lesson. He had to put people in his cabinet that had to get approved. The Senate is not our best friend. So he had to have candidates, but so far, I think everything is going okay. But we still have 4 years to go, and I'm never comfortable with Marco Rubio. So I mean, we'll see what happens going forward. So far with Ukraine, I'm pleased.
What about economic deals with Russia, which is blowing my mind? RT over the weekend reported that possibly the Trump administration is interested in being an investor in the Nord Stream 2 pipeline after the Biden administration blew it up. And the first Trump administration had said, we don't want Nord Stream 2 to become a reality. We'll sanction it to death. And now the Trump administration is like, anything and everything that will provide that will provide cheap energy for our people to grow our economy. Is that the way you see it, or is there another way to see it?
Well, I noticed that Russia wants to end this war. Putin is making it so obvious, saying that make a minerals deal with us. We have more minerals than Ukraine does. Same thing. He wants to resume travel between Russia and the United States. This is awesome. Instead of going to nuclear war, we could get along. with Russia, which is a natural resource powerhouse. That's why globalists have always wanted it for hundreds of years. They wanted to carve it up for themselves, and Russia stood up for themselves and saved their nation, kind of like what we're doing with our own nation, with President Trump. So I'm happy. We should get along with Russia, China, Iran. We could trade with anybody. There is no reason to put hundreds of thousands or even millions of lives at risk when we could just trade for whatever resources they have. So I hope the more deals that they can strike with Russia, the better, because that will make war that more unlikely.
Chris Rossini, co-host of the Liberty Report, and really great to have you here on the show. Director of the Ron Paul Institute. We like your way of thinking around here. Anti-war, get out of this corrupt country, bring our resources and interests back home to the United States. Thank you, Chris. Great to see you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Nice to start off the week on a pro-peace message, isn't it?
Yeah.
Finally around here.
Exactly right. Did you guys understand this Eddie Haskell reference I made between Zelensky and is that too dated of a reference? Because even I was not around when Leave It to Beaver was new on the air. I just wanted to make that clear.
All for nostalgia.
I don't know. Philip, you know Leave It to Beaver, the Eddie Haskell?
I'm aware of it. Yes, I used to watch.
Okay,
I used to watch Leave It to Beaver and My Three Sons after school when I was in middle school.
Okay, all right. Just making sure. My dad used to call my boyfriends Eddie Haskells, so it's not a good thing.
Revolutionary salute to my brother Zeke for the donation to the war chest. Revolution is way of life. Absolutely appreciate the love, family. Salute to you.
Well, I'm very familiar with that archetype.
All right, we've got more news to get to. Are we going to do this?
Yes, we are. Okay, a new study shows what is a consistent trend, that gender transformation only makes mental health worse. We're talking about surgical
massive NATO bases in Poland, of course. Then on the other hand, they're sitting on the precipice of total destruction if NATO pushes Russia any further. And into a nuclear war? Poland will be wiped off the map. So there's like sort of a madness pervading the government of Poland right now. I found it very curious, the position of Poland's prime minister, Donald Tusk. He's doubling down and basically pushing for all-out war against Russia. He basically condemned on X the other day Trump's push for peace with Putin. Can you imagine condemning peace just because you want Ukraine to be wiped off the map?
I don't have to imagine. There's a whole contingency on X that is condemning peace talks. We are here. It exists. It's a crazy thing to observe.
One of the smartest men in Poland is a man by the name of Dr. Michael Krupa. And he's joining us right now, and he's bringing his brain and his insight to us from Warsaw, Poland. What time is it there right now, Dr. Krupa, in Warsaw?
It's currently 10:20 p.m. out here in Eastern Europe.
All right. So there's a madness that's floated through Poland, it seems like, over the past few years. You've been watching it very closely. You described it to me as desperation and confusion all wrapped in one. So what is happening in Poland right now, and where do you think Donald Tusk comes down on all of this, pushing more weapons and support to Ukraine, or will he go on the peace direction?
Well, I think Donald Tusk will go anywhere Brussels tells him to. And right now, the Brussels contingent, which is led by Ursula von der Leyen, is obviously...
As I'm going to show, it is horrible in Ukraine right now. I mean, you can ship them. See, all this shipping of weapons really pissed Russia off. So Russia is showing them it's not going to be nowhere to push your weapons to real soon. Russia just started a major offensive in the Kharkiv region. We're going to look at that. They collapsing all over the place. All of this is nonsense that they're talking about. It's over for Ukraine.
On the side of war and more conflict and more bloodshed. Let's not forget that the European Union and Donald Tusk, along with the European Union, they basically sold their soul out to Joe Biden. I'm pretty sure they were all excited that, Kamala Harris might win the last elections in the United States, the presidential elections. And here we are, Donald Trump is president, and all of a sudden things are really changing. So it is a big difference from what was declared in the first Trump administration, where, we had the big words about getting along with Russia. But then, you had the neocons in and around Trump in the personnel that were screwing, unfortunately, much of what he tried to do, institute a new détente with Moscow. But this time around, because of the loyal people that Trump has around him, we're actually seeing results. And they're coming at a pretty fast pace. I have to say, I'm even surprised. at how quickly the president has moved with his pro-peace agenda. The smackdown last Friday in the Oval Office was just, I think, one of the opening salvos of that. But going back to your question, Clayton, I think Tusk is going to get along. He's going to go along to get along. Now, the problem with the Polish political scene at this moment is not only were they not expecting Trump to move so quickly in the direction of a new modus vivendi with Moscow, but it seems that the official opposition, through the lips of its official presidential candidate today, one Karol Nawrocki, so the opposition party being Law and Justice, has stated that, you know, Donald Tusk is stupid on Russia, but we should be even more stupider, because he said what we should do is we should sever diplomatic relations with Poland. So unfortunately, the craziness in Poland has gone sky high. But at the end of the day, they're going to have to succumb to one source of power, you know, whether it comes from the United States or Europe, because we know that Europe, even as they say, without the American backstop, can do nothing vis-a-vis Russia.
I've been wondering if there was ever any way for them to save face and follow Donald Trump into a peace agreement, because they parroted the lines of the White House, the lies about the war in Ukraine, so faithfully. And so are they just in too deep? They're through the looking glass and they can't come back? And do you think that that's what the European people want? Because we're seeing madness out of Europe, but we should not fool ourselves that the people of Europe have this strong appetite to fight Russia.
Yeah, do the Polish people think that way?
No, of course not. No way in hell. And I think this goes hand in hand with the opinion of the vast majority of the public opinion in all the other 26 European Union countries, and also the countries in Europe that are not part of the EU. The thing is, I believe that the current establishment, so basically the two parts of the sort of solidarity revolution that came to power after 1989. So you have the liberals and you have the fake conservatives from Law and Justice. They have a real dilemma right now, because the entire existence of the Third Polish Republic and their entire political careers were based on the premise that we will always be anti-Russian. And anything that comes from the United States regarding Poland, regarding NATO, will always be directed against Russia. Well, surprise, surprise, it turns out that's not the case in this instance. And they're having a little bit of a dilemma, because they've invested so much moral capital, so much physical capital, so much propaganda, so much of their own personal honor in claiming that, first, Vladimir Putin is a dictator who's hell-bent on invading the rest of Europe once he takes care of Ukraine, that Volodymyr Zelensky is Winston Churchill, and that Ukraine is, an idyllic place of democracy and the rule of law. You know, it's funny, because before we went on, I heard the commercial about the American pig meat that's being sold, not from China, and there was a statement that you made there, Clayton, that it's basically where a pig can feel free to be a pig. Well, when I think of that, I think of Ukraine automatically. And when I saw Zelensky at the White House, it's something that came to mind, because if you think of the corruption that country, that literally third world country, is swimming in, for anybody to say that is any viable alternative to what we have in Russia, with all its problems, obviously, is just total lunacy.
Let's talk about Donald Tusk, because, as you mentioned, he kind of goes where the wind blows him, right? And if you look at his previous prime ministership, what was he prime minister from like 2007 to 2014? Forgive my Polish history, right? Then he took a little break, he had a siesta, and now he's back. Yeah. But back then, he was talking about aligning himself with Russia, maybe not aligning, but being friendlier. I'm just going to read... I want to read an old quote from him. I think this is from 2007 from Donald Tusk. It says, quote, "Although we have our own views on the situation in Russia, we want dialogue with Russia as it is. The lack of dialogue serves neither Poland nor Russia. It spoils the interests and reputation of both countries on the international arena. Therefore, I'm convinced that time for a positive change on the issue has just arrived." So what changed? It seems like he was ready to have a dialogue with Russia.
The year, probably 2007. Yeah. Right. When warmongers, John McCain decided that was unacceptable. So that was a pivotal year, if it is 2007. But you answer. Go ahead.
Yeah, he was truer words had never been spoken. I mean, if I were to put that quote to any, voter of the current regime, they would say, oh, that must be some, that must be Grzegorz Braun, for example, or some Russian agent. It's like, no, it's your own prime minister from 2007. It's like, what? So surprise, surprise. But no, I think what we have to understand is at that time, we were getting signals from the Obama administration that they were willing to, implement the so-called reset, which was obviously no reset at all. It was just a ploy to get Medvedev involved in sort of sidelining Putin in Russian politics. That didn't work, obviously. So Tusk at that time understood that since the Americans are opening up to Russia, we should go along since we're, America's greatest ally in Eastern Europe. But right now, I'm actually pretty surprised, because the political diagnosis that I was putting out for a couple of weeks, and even just after Trump's election, was that this current government would want to keep the gravy train rolling in terms of NATO, in terms of more American troops in Poland, that they wouldn't dare stand up to Trump. But it turns out that the hatred that Tusk has for everything that President Trump represents in terms of this rebirth of American nationalism, in terms of putting your country first, in terms of sealing your border, in terms of saying, no, there is an American culture. We're all not globalists today. That's something that's anathema to Donald Tusk. And I think that hatred, coupled with what's happening in the European Union with the clowns that are currently governing in Brussels, and their hatred for everything that Donald Trump represents, I think convinced them that he's going to play his cards with the European Union. He's going to stick with Berlin and Brussels. But I fear that at the end of the day, when reality sinks in and those people, or the people just after them, like, for example, the Alternative for Deutschland, Germany, begin serious talks with the Russians, we're going to be at the back of the line, and the Russians are going to forget about what we did for this situation to come about, what we as Poles did.
What happens if the U.S. leaves NATO? Seems like it's growing increasingly likely that Donald Trump will pull the United States out of NATO, pull out funding completely out of Ukraine. What happens to Poland if that happens?
Well, the surprising answer is nothing happens. Putin's not going to invade. I think we should be happy that foreign forces are going to be leaving Polish soil. No sovereigntist, no patriot wants foreign forces, even friendly forces as American forces, on our territory. I think the collapse of NATO, well, which will, obviously happen once the United States leaves the alliance, means that the most important cause of this war has basically been eliminated. So I think there's obviously going to be a lot of, I heard today that some former members of the Solidarity movement, I think along with like Valensa, they sent an open letter to Trump, accusing him of, kowtowing to Putin, and that reminds him of the old communist days and so on, and appeasement, blah, blah, blah. We know the whole repertoire. Obviously, I don't think that letter is going to reach the White House, and good that.
Revolutionary salute to our brother Antoine for the donation to the war chest. Revolution is a way of life. Absolutely appreciate the love, family. Salute to you.
It's not going to reach the White House, but it's these old boomer clowns that think they're still relevant in Polish politics. But nothing will happen. I think it'll give Europe breathing space to do what President Macron, out of all people, has been talking about for many, many years now, about regaining European independence in the sense of nation states creating an entity that's powerful, but still retaining their independence, but not being subject to the whims of Washington and American hegemony. So that can only bring good fruits to the old continent. And I'm hoping that in a couple of months, we will see the United States, if not quicker, because I'm seeing the vibes on Twitter right now, on X, sorry, that there's a serious push for the United States to leave NATO.
Right. Well, that's an interesting way to think about the trajectory of the European Union, because on X, I also see a lot of hyperbole saying, oh my gosh, if we leave NATO, the United States, that's the collapse of the European Union. And the European Union, that the current leaders don't have the people of Europe and their best interest at heart. But perhaps there is a movement that could, in fact, bring the EU into a more positive body. So I appreciate that take. Mike Krupa, thank you so much for joining us, for staying up late from Poland. We really appreciate your analysis always.
One of the smartest men in Poland. Thank you, Dr. Mike Krupa.
Thank you, guys.
I hope everyone pays attention to you in Poland. Be a safer world. Thank you, Doc. Great to see you, as always. We should put up a poll. Let's put up a poll. How many people watching right now? We got 40,000 of you watching across all of our platforms right now. I think we can do a poll on YouTube. Should the United States leave NATO? Let's just make that a simple question, David, if we can. on YouTube. I know. Can we do polls yet on Rumble? I know, and I always ask that, but maybe we can put one up on X as well. But anyway, we'll put that up here in the chat, and just you guys can answer it here. We'll put the poll up here. But should the United States leave NATO? Colonel Douglas
yes.
McGregor has been saying
not to lead the survey, but yes,
that it's not a defensive organization at all in its founding. Of course, it was meant to be a defensive organization. It really has never lived up to that in its many years of history.
No, they killed civilians on their first bombing mission. So
Operation Gladio, anybody? All right, we've got more news to get to here on your Monday. There is the poll. It's up now on the channel. Should the United States leave NATO? You can weigh in on our poll. We'll check it here at the end of the show. Overwhelmingly, people are just saying yes. Type it in the poll here. 97% of you say yes so far.
And you can vote on behalf of the United States, even if you're not in the United States.
Yeah, I mean, if you're in Europe, feel free to vote as well.
Yeah,
let us
pretend
know.
you're voting on behalf.
Recalled. Well, we are in a World War III moment right now as President Trump pushes for peace, cutting off all U.S. aid to Ukraine. They had a big meeting today. Are they going to cut off all aid to Ukraine? I love that Senator Mike Lee posted that on Twitter X today, and he said,
I told y'all, when Zelensky sat there and talked tough and acted tough and went over there to Europe and they acted like they were somebody that they're no longer empires, they're nobody that can't even defeat the Taliban. Now, when they did that, the only thing Trump was going to have to do is say, okay, and step aside. They say, hey, wash my hands of it. It don't have nothing to do with us. Stop military aid, and they was going to crumble. No matter what the Europeans try to say or do, they're going to get defeated. Now, I'm going to show you Russia has went berserk in Ukraine. They're not going to be able to hide this for too long. They can send whatever they want over there. The Russian military is starting the war.
Who supports this? Give us a thumbs up. I gave 30 thumbs up to that post. Europe is lining up, though, meanwhile, to go directly to war with Russia. And the end game, to me, is nuclear war, because what else are you going to achieve? Do you think that Russia is just going to roll over? The White House right now just made a statement saying that time isn't on Zelensky's side. So we'll get to the latest here in a moment. But first, we're learning more about what happened during that explosive White House meeting last week. According to the Daily Caller, the meeting was supposed to go just as any state meeting would go. A quote, this was set up to be like every other state visit, a senior aide reportedly recalled. This was an Oval Office spray. They'd be cordial handshake, take a couple of questions, and then they'd have lunch. But then all hell broke loose. The plan went up in smoke when Zelensky arrived and immediately was sort of sticking to a script that it looked like he had. He might have had earlier meetings with Susan Rice, Victoria Nuland before he arrived at the White House, telling him basically, don't go with this deal. Push for security guarantees. We want troops. We want weapons, which President Trump has repeatedly said he would not include in their mineral agreement. So why are you trying to torpedo this deal? You know what's in this thing. Then the fireworks went off in the Oval Office. And of course, we now know today, according to the Associated Press, Ukraine Zelensky says the end of the war with Russia is very, very far away. To which Donald Trump responded, this is the worst statement that could have been put up by Zelensky, and America will not put up with it for much longer. It's what I was saying. This guy doesn't want there to be peace as long as he has America's backing, and Europe in the meeting they had with Zelensky, stating flatly that they cannot do the job without the United States. Probably not a great statement to have been made in terms of a show of strength against Russia. What are they thinking? Trump said. Now, here are the warmongers that met this weekend. Of course, they all came together in Europe. In London, there's Zelensky.
Claire Daly is calling them a cover band for the Tony Blair warmongering efforts around the Iraq war. They're basically doing the same thing. They're lying to the world, actually, that stand with Ukraine is the new weapons of mass destruction, and they are trying to lead their people into a war. And again, we must remind ourselves that the people standing there, most of them have failed up. Ursula von der Leyen has never been elected by the people, was only named in elections after her party won. We're looking at, let's see, Antonio Costa, ousted for a Green Deal scandal in Portugal.
Mark
Rutte, who was ousted in the Netherlands as the leader there, promised to end his career in politics. These are the people who want more.
So Chris Rossini is the director of the Ron Paul Institute. He's been watching all of this very closely here as, of course,
Well, as Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky reels from a humiliating trip to the US, he has received words of comfort from European allies. But on the ground, things are heating up. Russia has sharpened its attack, unleashing a devastating combination of missiles, drones.
On the ground. Now, while Britain talking all that shit, Germany, France, Portugal, all the greatest colonizers you could think about, you know, they conquered the entire world. Oh, Lord, that was a long time ago. Long time ago. Now we get to sit back and see their humiliation. Now, they said they didn't need the U.S. That Britain sending troops, planes, all that gangster shit they're talking. And what did Russia do? They started doing what y'all said, y'all gonna go hard? Well, we gonna go harder.
Guided bombs and heavy artillery fire on the front lines.
They just talking tough. Now, Putin is acting tough on the battlefield. Talk is cheap.
Russia claims that in the past 24 hours, over 1,000 Ukrainian soldiers have been killed across the Ukrainian battlefield. The Russian Defense Ministry says that several Ukrainian military targets were destroyed along with Western-supplied weapons. Ukrainian officials have now revealed that an unspecified number of fatalities resulted from a Russian missile strike on a military training ground approximately 130 kilometers from the front line. The Iskander-M ballistic missile capable
Lord have mercy. Military training ground. You mean to tell me they wasn't even in the war? They was training for the war and Putin brought the war to their front door? Oh my God. That was a message to Britain and Germany. If you bring your ass into Ukraine, wherever you at, you could think you far away from the battlefield. No, far away from the battlefield is in Britain and Germany and France. If you come into Ukraine, this would happen to you.
Of Mach 6 speeds and pinpoint accuracy was reportedly used in the attack. The attack demonstrates Russia's continued reliance on high-precision weaponry to disrupt Ukrainian operations near its border. Ukrainian officials confirmed fatalities but remained tight-lipped on numbers. Reports suggest up to 40 were dead and 90 others were injured.
Oh, there are hundreds. Now, here's the thing about that. Training. Who was training them? The Ukrainians not training the Ukrainians. You have some NATO officers, so we're going to get dozens of NATO trainers. They got killed too in this exercise.
Ukraine's Land Forces commander vowed to hold those responsible accountable for negligence. The strike occurred Saturday, but was only confirmed today. Similar incidents have...
See what happened? They say they're going to arrest somebody for negligence. What do you mean negligence? Somebody must have told Putin, yeah, y'all, Britain and France over there talking tough. This is what happened when you talk tough, man.
Plagued Ukrainian forces, including a deadly attack in Poltava last year that killed 60. Meanwhile, in Kharkiv, a Russian drone slammed into a residential building, igniting a fire and injuring 8 civilians. Images show emergency crew battling flames in the devastated structure. Moscow has repeatedly denied targeting civilian targets. Meanwhile, Ukrainian forces unleashed a devastating drone attack on Russia.
They ain't unleashing nothing. They had propaganda. Salute, family. Why is Zelensky hot? Zelensky, you need to come back home, brother. Your country is on fire. and you stay in Europe begging, they can't help you, brother. Nobody can help you anymore. You know, Zelensky might not come back. Y'all, we think Zelensky might not come back. They might just be acting like he on a trip around the man. Zelensky might not come back to Ukraine. Yeah, you heard it here first. It might not be nothing to come back to.
Ukrainian sources confirmed that the armed forces of Ukraine have suffered more heavy losses, killing up to 150 Ukrainian soldiers, including up to 30 foreign instructors at the Novomoskovsky training ground near Cherkassk in Dnipropetrovsk region.
30. Well, I told you it's going to be dozens. Come on, man. Now, listen to me. I told you it's going to be dozens of two different sources. That's what that's called. This real journalism here. I told y'all two different sources. We just heard the Indian people tell y'all Iskander missile hit a military training ground in Ukraine. It said, and I told y'all, it wasn't going to be Ukrainians training Ukrainian. No, fuck no. You're going to British, German, Poland, Portuguese, Belgium, Dutch, you know them, Romanian, those type of NATO trainers were training them, and they got killed too.
Kiev's losses were also confirmed by the Russian Defense Ministry, which released a short video on March 2, 2025, showing an Iskander-M operational tactical missile system strike, signaling a major blow to Ukrainian forces and their international training partners at the NATO training ground.
Yeah, that's a warning.
Russian reconnaissance had detected suspicious activity at the military training ground in the formation area of the 157th Separate Mechanized Brigade of the Armed Forces of Ukraine near Cherkassk.
Now, watch it. Y'all, somebody email it.
A Iskander missile carrying cluster munitions.
Somebody need to, I'm going to email it to them because they not showing this. This is good footage, man. What's wrong with them? They got millions of viewers, man. They can do some big numbers. They ain't been showing no war footage lately. They keep showing that circus. No, show this.
Missions killed a group of enemy soldiers while they were training at the time. In addition to the dramatic loss of personnel, a Iskander blast also destroyed 32 vehicles at the site, and it is suspected that foreign instructors.
Now imagine Russia can do this in Britain, in Germany, in France, in NATO, in the US, you know? Russia can hit them while they're training in their own country. This is a warning, bro. You don't even have to be in the fight. They can take you out. Whatever they're woofing and talking tough to rip their taxpayers off, Putin tired of the talk. Donald Trump just stopped the military aid to Ukraine, man. It's going to be all bad news every day, and we're going to cover all of it.
Including NATO personnel, were present at the facility. With the loss of personnel and equipment, Ukraine's training capacity could be compromised, which could delay or disrupt future military operations. The attack also served as a reminder of Russian ability to target vital military infrastructure and personnel, including those of foreign countries involved in the conflict. The Iskander strikes were part of an ongoing effort by the Russian armed forces to destroy key military training facilities and disrupt Ukrainian combat readiness.
Come on, bro. That terrifies, bro. Come on, bro. That terrifies people. Like, they're already scared to go to war, but now you die while you training. Come on, man. People want to surrender. It's nowhere to run. It's nowhere to hide. Nobody can help you. The Europeans say they're going to send some troops. This going to happen to them. What they going to do? What the fuck? They can't defend themselves. Come on, bro. This is ridiculous. The humiliation don't stop there, because I told y'all, while they woofing in Europe, they'll break loose in Ukraine. Ukraine's on fire now. Blood in the water, man. Russia smell it.
In light of the swift progress of the Russian army on the battlefield, and the public disgrace of the leader of the Kiev regime, Volodymyr Zelensky, the so-called summit to support Ukraine, which is taking place in London, appears to be a feeble attempt by Europe to postpone the inevitable surrender of the West in its confrontation with Moscow. Unfortunately, the so-called European leaders are still in strong denial, and do not want to admit their crushing defeat by the Kremlin. In this regard, we continue to hear absurd and sometimes inadequate statements from some European countries. For instance, a few hours ago, French President Emmanuel Macron, in all seriousness, said that if Russia wins in Ukraine, then countries such as Moldova and Romania will also be conquered by Moscow. Russia is very aggressive and heavily armed. And this aggressive and heavily armed Russia is standing on our doorstep. Russia is running powerful disinformation campaigns in France, as well as terrorist attacks across Europe. We must do everything to protect ourselves. Our common security is at stake, French President Emmanuel Macron said.
He's scared.
Well, my dear truth seekers, hearing such statements, it becomes clear that many so-called European leaders need psychiatric help. The realization that they had failed to inflict a strategic defeat on Russia turned these European globalists into real fanatics, ready to fully destroy not only the whole of Ukraine, but also their own countries, in order to satisfy their bloody ambitions. Meanwhile, Russia continues to ignore the hysterical and inadequate statements of European leaders, rapidly approaching a final and convincing victory. So, while European leaders were discussing a new action plan, the Russian aerospace forces, along with missile forces, launched another massive missile attack on military installations in the southern, central, northern, and western parts of Ukraine. In total, on the night of March 2nd, independent monitoring services recorded about 50 powerful explosions in Ukrainian regions such as Sumy, Vinnytsia, Cherkasy, Khmelnytsky, Kiev, Dnipropetrovsk, and Odessa. It is noteworthy that in the last 48 hours, this is the second massive missile strike on the territory of Ukraine. Moreover, judging by the incoming information, Russia does not intend to stop, or even reduce the number of massive missile attacks on Ukraine. The significant presence of Tu-95MS and Tu-22M3 strategic bombers in the airspace of Belarus and along the border areas of the Russian Federation suggests that massive missile strikes on Ukraine will persist for the next 24 hours. All this indicates that Russian military intelligence continues to successfully identify even the most classified enemy targets, even in the western part of Ukraine. So, a few hours ago, the first details of the Russian massive missile attack on the territory of Ukraine, which took place on the night of March 2nd, finally appeared. And these details shocked not only Ukrainian, but also Western experts. So, in the Sumy region, Russian missiles destroyed a cluster of enemy heavy equipment in the southwestern part of the Yunukovka settlement. It is reported that the Ukrainian command and its NATO military advisors plan to transfer this heavy military equipment to Kursk region. In the Vinnytsia and Cherkasy regions, Russian kamikaze drones and cruise missiles rained down on gas processing plants, thanks to which the military-industrial complex of Ukraine continued to function. In addition, almost all airfields in these regions were also subjected to rocket attacks. Reports indicate that nearly all the runways at these airfields were severely damaged due to the missile strikes. On the night of March 2nd, the most explosions were recorded on the territory of the Starokostiantyniv Air Base, in the Khmelnytsky region, in the southern part of the city of Starokostiantyniv. Reports indicate that Russian missiles and kamikaze drones not only disabled all the runways of this airbase, but also destroyed all vehicles used for transporting aviation fuel. In the Kiev region, independent monitoring services recorded about 10 powerful explosions in cities such as Kiev and Obakhov. Later, Ukrainian sources confirmed that Russian kamikaze drones and cruise missiles hit industrial enterprises in these cities, as well as 2 weapons depots, where finished military products were stored. In the Dnipropetrovsk region, a Russian Iskander-M ballistic missile, with a cluster warhead, hit the Novomoskovsky military training ground. According to the Russian Defense Ministry, this missile strike was carried out on a cluster of Ukrainian soldiers from the 157th Mechanized Brigade. Furthermore, the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation also stated that there were 30 NATO military instructors among these Ukrainian soldiers. It is reported that they were British, German, French, and Canadian officers. In total, as a result of this missile attack, 150 Ukrainian soldiers and 30 NATO officers were killed.
Walk along and find out.
And finally, in the Odessa region, in the southwestern part of the city of Odessa, a Russian Iskander-M ballistic missile hit a bulk carrier that had arrived from Canada. As it turned out, there were 10 units of Roshel Senator infantry mobility vehicles, 30 units of M777 towed howitzers, and dozens of 155mm artillery shells on board this bulk carrier. It is reported that as a result of this missile attack, the military cargo was completely destroyed, and the vessel itself was critically damaged. Currently, this vessel continues to sink in the port of Odessa. The Russian Defense Ministry noted that this bulk carrier was regularly used by the North Atlantic Alliance to transport military cargo from North America to Ukraine. By the way, on the evening of March 2nd, Ukrainian TG channels, citing their own sources in the Ukrainian General Staff, stated that U.S. intelligence transmitted to Russia data on the arrival of a bulk carrier with military cargo on board in the port of Odessa. Numerous sources in Odessa also confirmed this information. According to them, the arrival of this vessel from Canada was kept strictly secret, and it was the Americans who passed this secret information to the Russians. Moreover, the Americans also informed the Russians of the exact name and quantity of military equipment on board this ship. Sources in the Ukrainian General Staff are confident that the current U.S. administration will not officially announce a ban on the supply of weapons to Ukraine. Instead, U.S. intelligence will continue to provide Russia with all the necessary information to destroy military supplies destined for Ukraine.
My friends, while all the headlines are dominated by Trump, potential peace negotiations in Ukraine, as well as with the growing tensions between the United States and Europe, in the meantime, Russian soldiers are sharpening their shovels. Today we'll take a look at military operations north of the city of Kupiansk, all the way up to the Russian border. Nobody's talking about it. Certainly not the mainstream media, and that's what's concerning. I think this Russian offensive across the Oskol River could be the focal point of 2025. In the past weeks, Russian Sturm detachments have already consolidated numerous breachheads in this sector north of Kupiansk. A bit like the Ukrainian amphibious operation in Krinky, but without British officers planning the entire thing.
Yeah, baby!
The Russian army transported entire battalions using little boats and rafts, crossing the Oskol River in small groups. And that's how assault units consolidated one breachhead after another. Something is brewing, something big is about to burst out. We can expect the Russian command to begin a months-long campaign to envelop Kupiansk. We can feel how the Russian command is trying to maintain the highest level of secrecy about their plans. Regarding this upcoming offensive into Kharkiv Oblast, Russian Telegram channels also openly admit it. It smells like a prelude to something much larger. The place for putting the Ukrainians on a new tripwire is very suitable. So while the mainstream media is obsessed with the Netflix-type drama surrounding Trump, the Russians are preparing a large offensive to break the status quo and take Kharkiv Oblast by storm. So in this video, we will do a step-by-step analysis on how the Russian army managed all these amphibious operations, and most importantly, what we can expect next. No spoilers, but I will also analyze some exclusive footage of a Russian assault squad clearing an entire trench. More on that later. Welcome to History Legends, and here are the latest news of the Russo-Ukrainian war. If you're new to this channel, make sure to like and subscribe. As you know, some of my Ukraine videos have been targeted with limited or no ads. So make sure to check out my Patreon or PayPal to keep the show running. Thank you to everyone that has already helped, and welcome to the headquarters. Let's start with the overall Russian objective in this campaign. Kupiansk, a town of about 25,000 people before the war. From an operational perspective, we can see that after months of offensive operations in the Pokrovsk sector, the Russian command now redirected its effort 200 kilometers to the north in the Kupiansk direction, which is now becoming a priority for the Russian army staff. It is strategically significant because it represents an important logistics hub for the armed forces of Ukraine, as it connects areas at the rear with forward positions. Kupiansk controls key roads connecting the northern regions of Kharkiv Oblast with the rest of Ukraine. At last, its urban area can conceal and house a lot of troops and military equipment. If our beloved Ukrainskaya Armia was to lose Kupiansk, they would have to relocate their entire logistics towards Chuhuiv or Izium, the only large towns in a 50-kilometer radius. For an entire year, the Russian army tried to attack Kupiansk head-on. Actually, no, it's a lie. It's been 2 years. It was very painful. As you can imagine, if it's been 2 years you're trying to get in, it's not going well. On the 19th of October, they did manage to break through and reach the Oskol River south of Kupiansk, but only made marginal gains since then. This changed in late November, when Russian assault units were ordered to get their willies wet as they launched amphibious operations across the Oskol River. We can believe their mission was to flank Kupiansk from the north and bypass all their fortifications on the east bank of the river. That's how small teams of riflemen used rubber boats and rafts to make their way towards the opposite bank of the river. The Russian army had effectively achieved operational surprise, as Ukrainian analysts call this operation unexpected. Then we left off in early December, when the Ukrainians formed the Kampfgruppe that counterattacked and knocked out the Russians from most of their breachheads. In this footage, you can see Ukrainian tanks and assault detachments from the 108th Separate Mountain Assault Battalion and the 3rd Spartan Brigade clearing the remaining Russian pockets of resistance. Russian soldiers swam across the Oskol River with a bloody nose, and that could have been the end of it. But as you know by now, Russians and Ukrainians, well, they're very stubborn. The big advantage for the Russian army was geography. They benefited from this 15-kilometer long by 4 kilometers wide forested areas sitting right on the banks of the Oskol River. This meant that the Russian army staff could concentrate and conceal large quantities of troops and military equipment. However, this time around, before getting their willies wet once again, the Russians decided to give a good pounding to the Ukrainians. For days, Russian artillery shelled Ukrainian positions along the entire west bank of the river, like these two 82mm 2B14 mortars that were knocked out, and this T-64 tank taken out by grenades dropped by drones. The Russians had been knocked out from most of their positions west of the river, but they still managed to hold on to this one hilltop. As you can see on this 3D map, this ridgeline is really high and dominates the entire battlefield. So while the Russian soldiers of this garrison were edging on this ridgeline, what I think happened is that they received a lot of reinforcements, but in a very stealthy way over multiple days. There were so many troops on this ridgeline that eventually this battle group just released. That's how on the 14th of December, Russian forces came back and completely swarmed the Ukrainian fortified bastions overlooking the river. This grouping advanced 1,300 meters forward and even managed to get a foothold in Vorichna, where they advanced into the urban area 400 meters beyond the river. Meanwhile, a second group crossed the river somewhere here and established a breachhead on this ridgeline. What's funny is that during World War II, the German command told its frontline units to never let a Soviet breachhead stand, no matter how small it was. They ordered immediate counterattacks because if it wasn't done, overnight this breachhead would grow into an impregnable fortress.
The Russian soldier could completely overcome any terrain obstacles in a very short time if he wanted to. Of the same nature was the Russians' constant effort to establish breachheads. They were most often carried out by means of infiltration. Postponing their elimination was a fatal mistake. Regardless of all countermeasures, the bridgehead continued to swell until it ran over.
By the end of the day, the Russian army controlled a 5-kilometer-long portion of the Oskol River. If we look at the 3D map, we can also see how they disembarked their troops in a very strategic location, as there are many forests and woods that can cover a large number of riflemen, and that's good to protect them from drones and enemy artillery. However, despite their quick victory, instead of pressing on, the Russian command ordered a Haltbefehl and all the troops just stopped. With their mighty shovels, they dug in and reinforced their current positions. That's only when the Ukrainian command realized the extent of the enemy offensive. In this Ukrainian drone footage, we see them target Russian boats going back and forth across the Oskol River, where they faced an endless stream of small teams of Russian riflemen moving up the front. January 2025. For 3 weeks, the Russian command stealthily reinforced its breachheads, without the Ukrainians being able to push them back. Once again, during this tactical pause, the Russians launched preparatory strikes. Various Ukrainian positions and vehicles were targeted all along the Oskol River, thus weakening their ability to reinforce frontline positions. Like this pickup, not pickup, but pickup. There was also footage of a Ukrainian BMP-1 that was destroyed. We can mention this Gvazdika self-propelled howitzer that was hit, an MRAP that was burned, and a supply van that was also targeted. We also have evidence of another 82mm mortar pit that was taken out by FPV drones. That's only a sample. There were a lot of videos, but you get the point of what type of targets the Russians struck. After days of foreplay involving artillery and drone strikes, on the 7th of January, the Ukrainians faced a painful double penetration. One Russian group pushed 1,000 meters and cleared this forested area, while the second one secured an additional 400 meters inside Vorichna. Notice how most of the southern part of the settlement was now marked as being in the gray zone. Typically, this is a sign that the Ukrainians didn't have enough infantry units to properly defend the entire urban area. There are also reports that the AFU increased its usage of mines to stop the Russian advance. For example, in this video, we see a Russian sapper clearing a path by detonating an M67 anti-personnel mine using some sort of hook. It's certainly not some high-tech gear, but look, it gets the job done. January 9th, another breakthrough. The Ukrainian front near Zapatne collapsed. The Russians achieved a 2-kilometer push where they cleared this entire forest. As you can see at the end of the tree line, the Russians even managed to capture this farm complex. It was an ideal position to hold as it laid on elevated terrain and thus prevented any serious Ukrainian counterattack. Additionally, from their newly captured positions, Russian forces had now effectively taken Zapadne into a pincer. Meanwhile, the storm detachments operating in Vorichna secured this entire sector next to the bridge. Although, realistically, all the crossing points have already been destroyed for a long time. With that being said, they could also be rebuilt. And now you understand the strategic nature of the village of Dvorichna. The Russian army could very well turn this village as a stepping stone for further military operations. That day, Russian forces also managed to get a foothold on the northern outskirts of the village. With this latest attack, the gray zone expanded and covered 3/4 of the settlement. In this video from the 9th of January, you can see Ukrainian soldiers of the 1st Company, 8th Battalion, 10th Mountain Assault Brigade Edelweiss, asking for more drones and electronic warfare assets. So we know this brigade is defending the Oskol River. 2 days later, there was also this video showing a Swedish-made CV-90 being stopped by swarms of kamikaze drones. This vehicle most likely belongs to the 21st Mechanized Brigade, commonly nicknamed the Swedish Brigade. On the opposing side, we have this video of drone operators of the 16th Special Purpose Brigade tracking down entire squads of Ukrainian soldiers. We could think that this brigade is active on the Oskol River front, but at the same time, I found some of their drone footage all along the Luhansk front, over 100 kilometers. So this is probably just a unit of drone operators. Meanwhile, a lot of artillery strikes were carried out by batteries attached to the 6th Command Arms Army, probably the formation tasked with breaking through the Oskol River. For days, the battle was raging in Vorichna. The Ukrainian command sent a lot of reinforcements and supplies to hold the line. Here we see a Ukrainian vehicle that detonated on a mine 4 kilometers from the contact line inside friendly territory. Since that happened on a path that was already cleared, it's most likely the result from a Russian ambush where they remote mined the entire sector. As a result, this could possibly mean that it became very difficult for Ukrainian vehicles to operate in this area west of Dvorichna. In the same sector, the tandem of Russian artillery and drones sniped a number of Ukrainian vehicles, whereas this helicopter-launched Kh-39 Elmore targeted this UAV control center. Russian drone operators also took out this repeater antenna, a device employed by Ukrainian drone operators to increase the coverage range of radio and cellular signals, enhancing communication with the FPV drones over longer distances. With these repeat antennas, drone operators don't have to sit right next to the front, but they can be located 20 kilometers at the rear. But if you destroy these antennas, the entire chain of control is broken. It's not a surprise that by the 19th of January, Russian storm detachments made some more gains and Ukraine lost a good chunk of the northern sector of Dvorichna, an area a little bit less than 1 square kilometer. Meanwhile, forward elements of the Russian army started flanking the village of Zapadne. 24 hours later, the Ukrainians retreated from the southern sector of Dvorichna after this 2,000-meter dash by Russian troops. That same day, Russian artillery heavily shelled these woods with TOS-1A thermobaric rockets. And the pounding was not over for Ukraine because fiber optics drones also double-tapped this Ukrainian M113A2 APC in the same sector. Meanwhile, Russian recon squads started carrying out infiltration missions toward this farm complex just outside the village. Since the Ukrainians were losing control of Dvorichna, these woods and this agricultural compound served as forward operating bases to maintain command and control over the northern part of the village. Ultimately, since the Russians were focusing a lot of their resources in this area, it could also indicate that the Russians were preparing for a big push north of Dvorichna, towards the village of Fiholivka. By the 23rd of January, Russian storm detachments swarmed this force near Zapadne, thus marking the furthest point west beyond the Russian bridgehead on the Oskol River. And that's also where we got an exclusive footage of a firefight that happened somewhere in that sector. It's early in the morning, it's still night, and we see a fire team of 6 Russian soldiers in some woods. Using sniper fire, they take down an enemy and pin down the entire group of defenders. Seconds later, they launch an all-out assault. Explosions detonate left and right as the stormtroopers leap from one tree to another in groups of 2. They approach enemy bunkers and throw grenades in each one of them. Moments later, they carefully progress inside enemy trenches. The soldier fires a GM-94 pump-action grenade launcher in support of the attack, a weapon typically utilized by Spetsnaz operators. The assault team then eventually reaches this checkpoint, so that they can respawn if shit hits the fan. In a very intense battle and almost claustrophobic, the rifle squad navigates from one dugout to another. In this frame, we see 4 soldiers cornering some enemy position, one of them emptying his entire mag on one of the openings. The Ukrainian defenders knew they faced some specialists and they were just hiding. It was better for them to wait because if they went out right away, they knew that the Russians would release everything turn by turn right on their face. After clearing this entire trench bastion, the attack squad set everything ablaze. Only then did the Ukrainian soldiers come out with their hands in the air. I counted 4 to 5 Ukrainians that were captured, and we have visual evidence of about 3 fatalities among the defenders. After that, the Russian assault squad went back to friendly lines with all the loot and POWs. As you can see, the attacker doesn't necessarily lose 3 times more men than the defender. In this case, I think mostly due to the surprise effect, the attackers lost 0 guys, while they inflicted 8 casualties on the defenders. Anyway, that was pretty much it for the month of January. Nope, that's a lie, because on the 31st of January, the Russians wanted to end the month with a remarkable bang as they launched a renewed amphibious operation against Novomlinsk. Again! They disembarked troops at 3 locations and the settlement fell instantly. GG, well played. While Russian drones mopped up the remaining enemy strongholds north of the settlement. That day, this Russian drone spotted this 4-man team entering this pickup truck and followed it as it was driving away from Dvorichna. And all of a sudden, the vehicle detonated, causing 1 fatality and 3 wounded. Once again, since they were kilometers inside friendly lines, this was probably caused by the Russians remote mining this entire sector. This also confirmed increased Russian drone activity north of Dvorichna. February 2025. As a summary, between December and January, the Russian 6th Command Arms Army managed to secure 3 bridgeheads over the Oskol River. Without any major Ukrainian counterattack to be reported, the Russian command had effectively struck one of the weak points of the Ukrainian front. It's also important for you to understand that these gains were made possible only using light infantry units. I haven't seen any Russian armored vehicles being used in this offensive across the Oskol River. Everything was achieved just with infantry supported by drones and artillery. And who knows, perhaps even some donkeys. We start the month of February with an impressive Russian feat of arms. 15 kilometers north of Dvorichna, 2 Belgian AIFV BC-25 APCs and a Canadian Russell Senator were destroyed while camouflaged in a warehouse as a result of a visit by a Russian Santa Claus. Now you also understand why Russian artillery strikes and FAB bombs often strike random warehouses far away from the front. Russian forces renewed their offensive across the Oskol River on the 4th of February and advanced 1.7 kilometers to the west, clearing the riverbank and securing a foothold inside Zapadne. In this Ukrainian drone footage, we can see the small Russian rifle teams that pushed inside the village and how they got bombarded by Ukrainian artillery. So after this attack, the Ukrainian command focused all its attention and resources there. It's a trap! That same day, 30 kilometers to the north, Russian forces also crossed the Oskol River near Topoli, a settlement sitting right on the Russian border. As you can see, they secured 2 small breachheads. One of these breachheads secured this forested area right along the river. Although it doesn't look very impressive, there's this 600-meter long tree line that goes directly inside the village of Topoli. Meanwhile, a second breachhead was established across this swampy area in Oskol River all the way onto this ridgeline, which represents one of the highest points in the entire sector. With this 2-pronged attack, the Russians essentially isolated the village of Topoli. For Ukraine's general staff, this Russian offensive suddenly got much bigger, much girthier than expected, and they didn't know how to handle it. Ukrainian journalist Tsiaplenko wrote the following on Telegram. Since mid-January, the enemy has been trying to cross the water barrier in this area. The first attempt was stopped, but the occupiers made a second attempt in another place and took up positions on the chalk mountains south of the village of Topoli. And that's exactly what I showed you on the 3D map. Now from this ridgeline, Russian positions completely overlook the village. If the Ukrainians can't regain this hilltop ASAP, it's just a matter of time before Topoli falls. On the 6th of February, the 6th Army launched an offensive north of Dvorichna, as some of its forward elements advanced 2 kilometers and got a foothold inside the village of Iholivka. But as the Russian riflemen tried to occupy some buildings and consolidate their gains, they got immediately swarmed and pinned down by FPV drones. 2 days later, further south, an endless stream of Ukrainian drone strikes indicated how Russian riflemen were spotted across Zapadne, as well as inside this farm complex north of the settlement. That's how we learned that it was the Ukrainian 151st Mechanized Brigade that was holding this part of the front, alongside the 10th Mountain Brigade Edelweiss and the 21st Mechanized Brigade. Russian infantrymen were not the only ones getting seriously spanked by FPV drone strikes. Here's a 6-man fire team of Ukrainian soldiers standing next to an M113 APC that got ambushed by airdropped grenades somewhere around Vorichna. Similar story for this entire squad of 11 Ukrainian soldiers. Unknown to them, there was a drone flying right above their heads, and they got targeted while going back and forth between their trenches and the pickup track. Because of this drone attack, this Ukrainian squad had to leave 2 of their buddies behind. Here's a direct quote from a soldier I know fighting in the AFU. Drones are super On the 12th of February, Ukrainian forces withdrew from this cauldron next to the Oskol River between Vorichna and Novomlinsk. This was a great success for the Russian Sixth Army as they now had undisputed control over a 15-kilometer stretch of the river. Surprise, surprise, that was the exact length of this entire forested area next to the Oskol River. Now imagine the amount of reinforcements and supplies that the Russians will be able to bring from one bank to another. However, soon enough, this Ukrainian withdrawal turned into a rout as forward elements of the Russian army pushed 3 kilometers along this countryside back into Vyholivka, a real blitz that captured half the settlement in one go. This attack would essentially prevent any Ukrainian counterattack directed towards Dvorichna. Talking about that same day, Russian rifle squads advanced 750 meters inside the center of the village, meaning almost the entire settlement was now under their control. The Ukrainians desperately tried to salvage the entire situation, but like you can see in this footage, a Ukrainian Humvee was ambushed by a fiber optics drone west of Zapadne. On the 14th of February, pro-Ukrainian Deep State UA reported the following on Telegram. Problems. The enemy continues to saturate the area with its infantry, but the assault is usually carried out by a group of several soldiers hiding in landings, houses, ruins, etc. There are not enough UAV crews to destroy them, but the enemy has significant advantage in FPV drones, which simply dismantles positions to zero, after which it is simply impossible to hold them. Unfortunately, the existing units of the territorial defense in this area have not coped with maintaining the defense. That's actually a big problem that I heard from people in the AFU. A lot of times, the Russians simply hammer fortified bastions until they're completely destroyed, bombarding it with FAB bombs, artillery strikes, drone strikes, until everything is destroyed and turned upside down. As a result, Ukrainian soldiers are forced to abandon their positions, and that's when the Russian infantry comes in. And the other thing that this post confirmed is that Russian assault units specifically target Ukrainian territorial defense units, which they know are typically weaker than other formations. And how do you get this information? By launching raids early in the morning and capturing POWs. On the 16th of February, the Russian 6th Combined Arms Army continued its offensive north of Dvorichna as it stormed this 2-kilometer-long tree line north of Novomlinsk, thus adding another stepping stone towards the full control of Vyholivka. Further north, near the Russian border, the situation got extremely critical for the AFU. Due to its remote location, Topoli became very hard to resupply. For example, around the 15th of February, a Ukrainian pickup truck coming back from a supply run got stopped by an airdropped grenade 3.5 kilometers away from Topoli. That same day, on the 16th of February, artillery batteries of the Ukrainian 3rd Tank Brigade heavily bombarded Russian trench lines sitting on this chalk mountain overlooking Topoli. It's very interesting because now we know that we have elements of the 151st Mechanized Brigade, the 21st Mechanized Brigade, the 10th Mountain Brigade Edelweiss, and now the 3rd Tank Brigade as well. All of this supported by numerous territorial defense battalions. 2 days later, on the 18th of February, Forbes released an interesting article. A Ukrainian night drone just blew up a North Korean wonder weapon howitzer supporting a Russian tank army. We don't know exactly where it happened as no geolocation was provided, but essentially we can confirm that a North Korean Koksan 170mm self-propelled howitzer was destroyed near Kupiansk. The article then states that it's supporting the 1st Guards Tank Army, which had been fighting to establish a bridgehead across the Oskol River. Nah. Like we've seen, it's the 6th Command Arms Army that was tasked with crossing over the Oskol River. Whereas, for a year and a half now, the 1st Tank Army was tasked with tightening the siege around Kupiansk. I mean, it's the most logical disposition of forces. You all prioritized open and flat terrain to deploy your armored columns, not sending them forward to ford rivers and swamps. It doesn't make any sense. All this to say that North Korean soldiers are not only utilized by the Russian command in Kursk, but they're now operating in Ukraine as well. By the way, I'm preparing an entire video on North Korean troops participating in the Ukraine war, so stay tuned. No territorial changes could be reported on the Oskol River front for about 10 days, when on the 25th of February, Russian forces stormed Topoli. Some sources claim that the settlement was captured through an amphibious operation. Others say that Russian troops crossed the border and attacked by land. I think it's none of these two options, as these Telegram channels clearly did not take a look at the map. If we analyze the territory that the Russians controlled, surprise, surprise, they attacked along this tree line, like I told you earlier, and that's from where they swarmed the entire village. At the end of the day, we know that Russian infantrymen were spotted right here inside the village, as Ukrainian drones tried to stem the enemy offensive. By the way, notice the low-tech strategy that the Russian soldiers used to stop drones from entering the building. And it worked. At this point, maybe riflemen should be equipped with nets that they can hang on doors and windows to secure their positions and prevent drones from entering. Overall, due to the remote location of the village of Topoli, the Ukrainian command only had very little forces deployed there. Now, that same day, on the 25th of February, according to various reports, the Russians attacked towards Kupiansk from their bridgehead near Zapadne. Apparently, recon units and forward elements of the Russian army reached the village of Holubivka, located right on the outskirts of Kupiansk. We can also mention how these two Ukrainian vehicles were roaming in this area between Zapadne and Vorichna, near this agricultural complex I told you about, most likely to rotate and resupply friendly units. But eventually they got spotted and one of them got destroyed by Russian drones. Like I told you in the introduction, I'm convinced that this operation across the Oskol River will play a major role in the Russian battle strategy for 2025. So let's analyze how things could play out. Since the Russians are the ones on the offensive and that they have the initiative, we'll take the perspective of the Russian command. Option 1. From their positions around Zapadne and on the outskirts of Holubivka, the most logical maneuver would be to push south along the Oskol River and capture this set of villages. Another benefit is that there's a lot of forested areas that can be used as stepping stones. The biggest one seems to be Kindrashivka, so we can expect heavy fighting to take place in this area. Once this is done, the Russian 6th Combined Arms Army will be able to storm the western bank of Kupiansk and thus pin down a great number of Ukrainian troops. But before launching any general assault, they will need a lot of reinforcements that will have to cross over the Oskol River. In the worst case scenario for our beloved Ukrainskaya Armia, the Russians successfully encircle the western side of the city, or even just storm the entire west bank. As a result, to prevent a complete encirclement, this would force Ukraine's general staff to completely abandon all the fortifications and their entire bridgehead east of the Oskol River. Realistically, the march on Kupiansk will be very difficult for Russian forces. For logistics reasons, because they have to ford everything across the Oskol River, they will need a lot of reinforcements, including armored vehicles. And because of the strategic nature of Kupiansk, we can also expect the Ukrainians to send a lot of reinforcements in this area. So let's take a look at option 2. In the north, from Topoli, the Russians will most likely try to attack Kamianka. I think they could be using a dual maneuver to strike both from land and through a river crossing operation. The benefit is that it will open a wide corridor with the Russian border, which will allow large armored columns to come as reinforcements and support the entire offensive, without having to risk these vehicles across pontoon bridges and river crossings. Proceeding from there, the Russians will push Zapad full west, a move that can be combined with a push out of Iholivka. The big battle will then be over the control of Kolodyazny, this village where the Belgian and Canadian vehicles were destroyed inside the warehouse. Simultaneously, as part of option 2, Russian assault detachments positioned in Zapadne and Vorichna could attack towards the settlements of Kutkivka and Ritkodub. The first objective would be to swarm this forested area in a pincer maneuver and eliminate this Ukrainian stronghold. Securing this area would also secure the entire breachhead by giving it more breathing room. Once all these positions are conquered, the Russian 6th Command Arms Army can launch a two-pronged attack towards Veliki Borluk. I know, it's almost 30 kilometers away from the Russian breachhead, but hear me out. If we zoom out, we can see how this town holds a strategic central position in this part of Ukraine. Of course, it's easy to draw arrows on a map, but in reality, all this might take a while, several months at least. At the same time, it's important to note that it will be very hard for Ukraine to supply all its units in such remote areas. Let's say that hypothetically the Russian armed forces capture Veliki Borluk. Well, from there they can head north towards Vovchansk and break the deadlock of this battle where Russian units have been bogged down since June 2024. Overall, in my opinion, the war objectives of this campaign will be Kupiansk, Veliki Borluk, and Vovchansk. And who knows, if this military campaign is successful, maybe Putin will decide to just annex Kharkiv Oblast. Once again, the big caveat of this conclusion is that we don't know if the Russians have enough forces available to even launch such a major operation. That's all I have for you today. Let me know in the comment section what you thought of my analysis.
Today is Monday, March 3rd, 2025. Larry Johnson will be here with us in just a moment. Larry, welcome here, my dear friend. It's 48 hours since the confrontation between President Trump and President Zelensky in the Oval Office on Friday afternoon that captivated all of us, captivated the world. What is your take on the fallout from that?
Well, I think it represents a watershed moment for the Trump administration. They may have been planning at that point to figure out a way to try to sort of stay involved with Ukraine, but I think Zelensky's behavior was so outrageous that it really pushed not just Donald Trump, it pushed the entire team over the edge. Look, when you lose Lindsey Graham, when the little lady from South Carolina who's been to, Kiev at least 9 times, according to one video I saw the senator mention, and who's been an ardent supporter of Zelensky. When he comes out and says it's time for Zelensky to go, that the entire, it's gone from nighttime to daytime. It's been a complete reversal.
You'll appreciate these 2 clips from Senator Graham, then and now. Chris, cut number 8.
I want to tell you and your people, you're the ally I've been hoping for all my life. Not one American has died defending Ukraine. You've taken our weapons and you've kicked their ass. And I'm very proud to have you as our ally. So, what do I think? Complete, utter disaster. What I saw in the Oval Office was disrespectful. And I don't know if we can ever do business with Zelensky again. He either needs to resign and send somebody over that we can do business with, or he needs to change.
Senator Graham credible, or you're just using him as a paradigm, as an example of if he's changed his mind, imagine how many other minds have been changed.
Yeah, I mean, because there was, you'd be hard pressed to find somebody in the Congress or in the Washington political elite, except maybe for the Ukraine's own ambassador to Washington, D.C., that had more fervor in supporting this whole effort in Ukraine. And look, this isn't about, they say, oh, this is support for democracy. Ukraine's not a democracy. It's a dictatorship. Donald Trump got that right. They have jailed political opponents, shut down opposition media, shut down the church, the Eastern Orthodox Church, and they've embraced neo-Nazis. Not just this, the whole neo-Nazi movement is not just some minority offshoot. It's at the heart of all of this. And but this isn't about promoting democracy in Ukraine. This is about destroying Russia. This is about taking Russian resources and controlling them by the West. That's what this whole project has been about from the beginning. And that's one of the reasons for such great animus directed at Vladimir Putin, because he basically put a stop to it in July of 2000, called in the oligarchs and said, okay, basically this raping of Russia, it's coming to an end. You're either going to, stay out of politics, invest your money in the country, or you can get out, or we'll put you in jail. It's a very stark choice.
Right.
And as a result of that, today Russia is its economy is strong, its people are well fed, well employed. The cities are amazing in terms of their beauty and cleanliness, because they weren't wasting money in foreign military adventures that were killing other people.
Tell me how the intelligence community, American, British, even Ukrainian, which is subject to MI6 and was, I don't know if it still is, subject to the CIA, how can they turn on a dime the way Donald Trump has turned American foreign policy 180 degrees, Larry?
Well, that's the problem. I was talking with one of my CIA buddies, retired, but he's still in touch with people who are active. And he told me of a conversation he had with one friend, because my friend was saying, we just got to shut her down and start all over. And the friend who's still working for years had said, no, we can reform. And just this last week, the friend came back to him and said, you're right. This place needs to be burned to the ground. We need to start all over. The fact that you've got so many analysts compromised that refuse to speak the truth about what's going on, refuse to accurately report to the president or up their chain of command. And and I understand why many didn't. They wanted to keep their jobs. They didn't want to risk being ostracized. They want to be part of the cool kids club. But what you have right now, in my view, is a corrupted analytical rank that are incapable now of suddenly being able to turn around and objectively report and tell the president, tell the director of national intelligence, tell the director of intelligence what's going on.
Why do you think Zelensky is afraid even to ask, or reluctant even to ask for a ceasefire?
No, because the neo-Nazis that back him will kill him. It's that simple. I think he's more terrified of them. He thinks, at least with the West, he can probably negotiate an escape. But we can pull up videos of these neo-Nazi characters, members of the Azov battalion, just going around and beating people to a pulp. And they embrace the writings and beliefs of Adolf Hitler. And they're not called neo-Nazi just because it's a pejorative term. It's a descriptive term. And it is, a lot of people will argue, how could Zelensky be supporting neo-Nazis? He's a Jew. Well, being born and being able to be recognized in Israel as being Jewish by virtue of your mother is a far cry from saying that he was ever someone who practiced Judaism. He did not. And he was, if anything, you could call him a token Jew. He's not really anything about practicing and observing the religious traditions of Judaism.
The picture Chris put up. Chris, put it up again. This is Oksana Markarova, the Ukrainian ambassador to the United States. This is a series of photos, of course, of her during the confrontation between President Trump and President Zelensky. I think she knew that it was a disaster in the making for her own country. Obviously, she couldn't say anything. She's right there in the Oval Office with them, but she was attempting to hide her emotions by pinching the top of her nose, like, is this really happening? Would Zelensky risk his own life if he were to say to Donald Trump, okay, Mr. President, get me a 30-day ceasefire and we'll see what we can work out? I don't think Putin would go along with it, but even if he asked for that, would Zelensky risk his own life once he got back to Ukraine?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. No, like I said, Zelensky didn't get into office because he was such a great guy and a visionary philosopher and politician. He was put there because he was one that could be manipulated, could be controlled, and the wealthy Ukrainian oligarchs that backed him, they had something else in mind. And if he crosses them, they will kill him. So, that's he keeps that in the forefront of his mind. But he's also, he really has lost touch with reality.
Do you think that President Trump and Vice President Vance understand what you just said? Because they seem to have been trying to extract from him statements or concessions, which, as you indicate, would result in his demise once he got home.
Well, if they didn't understand it on Friday, I think they finally, grasped it by now.
Would American intel, being truthful, rather than telling the president what they think he wants to hear, which is the intel that formerly existed, tell him, or tell Tulsi Gabbard, please tell the president this guy cannot ask for a ceasefire or he'll be dead the minute he sets foot on Ukrainian territory?
Well, knowing Tulsi, not on a personal basis, but just having watched her do things and what she said over the years, I'm sure she's already having an impact. And that is, it's like trying to turn a giant aircraft carrier with a small rudder.
Right.
It's going to turn slowly, but I think the turning has started. And she, by virtue of overseeing the production of the presidential daily brief, is, I think, taking a very active role to make sure that the very best intelligence is put in front of Donald Trump. And I know from friends who were involved with this process before that despite public claims that Trump doesn't read and Trump doesn't pay attention, what I was told by somebody who had been involved with briefings for both George W. Bush, Barack Obama, and then Donald Trump, said that of the three, Trump was the one who was always the most engaged, asked the most probing questions, and paid the most attention. So if Tulsi's giving him good product, then Trump is paying attention to it.
Here's, over the weekend, the European elites, the members of the EU or the members of NATO that wanted to give up a Sunday afternoon and fly to London did so. And at the end of that meeting, this is remarkable. It maybe you've seen it. It's actually delusional, but it's real. Prime Minister Keir Starmer of Great Britain made the following statement. Chris, cut number one.
Our starting point must be to put Ukraine in the strongest possible position now, so that they can negotiate from a position of strength. And we are doubling down in our support. Yesterday evening, the UK signed a £2.2 billion loan to provide more military aid to Ukraine, backed not by the British taxpayer, but by the profits from frozen Russian assets. And today I'm announcing a new deal, which allows Ukraine to use £1.6 billion of UK export finance to buy more than 5,000 air defence missiles, which will be made in Belfast, creating jobs in our brilliant defence sector. This will be vital for protecting critical infrastructure now and strengthening Ukraine in securing the peace when it comes.
Joe Biden wasn't so bold or so loopy as to say, hey, what I'm doing is helping the defense industry. How long will it take to make those missiles? Will there be a Ukraine left by the time they're manufactured? Does Sir Keir, most respectfully, even know what the hell he's talking about?
Well, simple answer is no. Look, this was the meeting of the Chihuahua Club. It's a toothless Chihuahua Club. All these European countries that assembled together to move imaginary armies around. And notice what he said. Oh boy, we're giving a $2 billion loan. Loan? You mean it's like your credit card company shows up and says, "Hey, Judge, man, here's some checks. Write them. We're only going to charge you 25% interest." Well, that's what the equivalent of what this group of European losers are doing.
It gets even worse, Larry. I'll play another clip for you, and maybe you've seen it. You've certainly heard about it, in which he says the UK will put boots on the ground and planes in the air. It's almost inconceivable to me that the UK boots on the ground would survive 24 hours, but I'll let you comment on it. This one is even more delusional than the clip we just ran, most respectfully. Chris, cut number 2.
We will go further to develop a coalition of the willing to defend a deal in Ukraine and to guarantee the peace. Not every nation will feel able to contribute, but that can't mean that we sit back. Instead, those willing will intensify planning now with real urgency. The UK is prepared to back this with boots on the ground and planes in the air. Together with others, Europe must do the heavy lifting. But to support peace in our continent and to succeed, this effort must have strong US backing. We're working with the US on this point after my meeting with President Trump last week. And let me be clear, we agree with the President on the urgent need for a durable peace. Now we need to deliver together.
Yeah, he's not going to get it. And notice he said, "Yeah, we're going to put boots on the ground and planes in the air, but we must have the backing and support of the United States." Well, they don't have the backing and support of the United States. And newsflash, they're not going to get the backing and support of the United States. The United States is now done with Ukraine. There's people aren't planting Ukrainian flags out in their yards. They're not doing marches in solidarity. They're not, not as long as it takes. That's gone. That's done.
Here's this is a little amusing. This is Marco Rubio in 2015 and Mike Waltz as recently as 2022 with some voiceover. can't make this up, by John Bolton. Chris, cut number 9.
Russia is governed today by a gangster. He's basically an organized crime figure who controls a government in a large territory. There's no other way to describe Vladimir Putin.
I think this entire invasion has been irrational. It's hard to understand what is actually being fed into Putin in terms of intelligence and reporting and how much of his own propaganda he believes.
I am concerned that the president, vice president of the United States have sided with the aggressor, with, as Mike Waltz was just saying there, somebody who's trying to recreate the Russian Empire, something he's been very clear about since 2005 at least. And now you have, sadly, both Mike Waltz and Marco Rubio in the administration. This is the point when somebody does 180 degrees from understanding American allies to backing America's adversaries, that you resign.
Mark, you're saying Marco Rubio should resign?
And Mike Waltz. This is really the time to do it.
So John Bolton, no surprise, for a year tried to feed into Donald Trump's ear, Putin wants to recreate the Soviet Empire. Putin wants to recreate the Soviet Empire, offering zero evidence for that absurd conclusion, from which springs Bolton's views on foreign policy.
Yeah, and what was that empire? I mean, we always hear this empire. Remember all those military bases that the Soviets had scattered around the globe? No, that didn't exist. They didn't have 700 military bases overseas. We did, the United States. Russia wasn't invading and fighting in Vietnam. Russia wasn't invading and fighting in Somalia. Russia wasn't invading and fighting in Syria. In Syria, they were invited in by the government to come to their assistance because of U.S.-backed insurgents. You go after country after country after country where people have been killed by U.S. military personnel. not by Russian military personnel. The Russians have stayed at home, and they are keen on protecting their borders. This empire he's talking about is simply Russia trying to get control of the territory on its immediate borders, just as the United States, is make sure that we don't have hostiles in Canada and Mexico.
Not to leave the impression of Marco Rubio with what he said a few years ago. Here's what he said earlier today, cut number 7.
Why is it okay to call President Zelensky Why is it okay to call President Zelensky a dictator, but not, as you say, call Vladimir Putin names?
Listen, we've spent 3 years calling Vladimir Putin names. That's not the point. Now, the point that we're at now is we're trying to get the man to a table, the Russians. And I've said from the very beginning, maybe they don't want a deal either. We don't know, but we haven't talked to them in 3 years. But maybe they do. The point is, do we want to make? I would ask everybody this: if there are no negotiations, what is the alternative? Another 4 years of war, another 3 years of war, in which the United States and Europe continues to pour billions of dollars into a war in Ukraine? Is that the alternative? I've asked every foreign minister I meet with, tell me your idea of how this turns out. Most don't have a plan. A few have said, well, let's give them another year of fighting. A year from now, a year later, after another year of death, another year of destruction, then maybe Putin will be ready to negotiate at that point. That doesn't sound like a good plan to me, and it certainly is not a plan the president's on board with.
My bad. That was not this morning. That was obviously yesterday on one of the talk shows. People, he works for Donald Trump. He's the Secretary of State appointed by Donald Trump, and his job is to put into place the foreign policy of Donald Trump. And Donald Trump took the chance on somebody who profoundly disagreed with him 4 years ago and now agrees.
All Rubio had to do is just give a factual answer. Yes, Vladimir Putin is not a dictator. Zelensky is a dictator. Putin has had democratic elections. There were opposition political parties. People were free to vote. He won the election. Zelensky canceled elections. Zelensky will not allow elections. And Zelensky is locked up all, not just some, all political opponents, and banned all opposition political parties and shut down all opposition media. That's the definition of a dictator. Putin's done none of that. I know firsthand from having traveled to Russia and been in at least 2 different cities. People aren't walking around paranoid looking over their shoulders. They don't have to look both ways to see if someone's listening before they talk. It's free, it's open, it's prosperous. And it is the one thing they don't understand, though, is with Putin is he keeps his agreements. He is, that's not necessarily to his credit. He is a lawyer. So, but among the lawyers, he appears to be a decent lawyer, the one that says, hey, this is what we've agreed on. And we're going to live by those agreements.
Almost as if he heard what you said about his presidency. Here's President Zelensky on elections. This is 2 days ago on March 1st. Chris, cut number 5.
If I am to be changed, and I'll hear, how can I put it? With what's happening with the support to change me, it will not be easy, because it is not enough to simply hold elections. You would need to prevent me from participating in the elections. And it will be a bit more difficult, so they'll have to negotiate with me. And I said that I'm exchanging it for NATO membership. And then it means that I fulfilled my mission. There is NATO. It means I've fulfilled my mission.
I don't know where he was when he was saying that. It was a Saturday. I think he was in Great Britain, but it's such a nonsense, Larry, if he even has the slightest inkling that a Ukrainian membership in NATO could somehow be the outcome of all of this.
Yeah. No, NATO, that was sort of the first sign gesture that Trump administration made to the Russians to show they're serious about trying to bring an end to this war was when Hegseth was at the NATO Defense Ministers Conference. I believe it was held at Ramstein, 2 weeks ago.
Right.
And he said very clearly, look, Ukraine is not going to be part of NATO, non-starter. And then Trump reiterated that. So taking NATO off the table for Ukraine, again, that was part of this, let's call it this Western cabal plan for years. They were using NATO as a wedge to try to take down Russia, to break Russia up, to dismember it, and then take all of its resources for themselves. And this has been, it's been actively pursued since at least 2008. And in the aftermath of the start of the Civil War in 2014, with the signing of the Minsk II agreement, it was in the aftermath of that signing that the intensity of U.S. and NATO military support and training for Ukraine took off, because they were envisioning, we're gonna create this proxy force in Ukraine that will be capable of defeating Russia. Because what happened in 2014 and into early 2015 is the militias in Donetsk and Luhansk actually defeated the Ukrainian army at the time.
Larry Johnson, always a pleasure, my dear friend. We'll see you again at the end of the week. All the best.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to bring on our first wonderful guests, Lev Galinkin, who is the author of A Backpack, a Bear, and 8 Crates of Vodka. He's also a journalist who writes for places like the Boston Globe, Los Angeles Times, the Washington Post. And we are also bringing on Mark Ames, who is the co-host of Radio War Nerd at Patreon. So welcome, Mark, and welcome, Lev.
Thank you. Happy to be here, Katie. Always happy to come on your show whenever you invited me. It's great.
Thank you. Yeah.
And to see Lev, of course, too.
Good to see you guys.
I always love talking to you both because you have such good perspectives on what's happening. And you guys actually have, unlike a lot of so-called journalists, you have some actual knowledge and experience, having one of you, obviously, coming from Ukraine, the other one having spent much time in Russia. It's exciting to have people speak about this who, not that experience per se gives you authority, but it is nice to have people who happen to have very good analysis and insight and also actually know what they're talking about firsthand. So I want to start off by asking a kind of general question, which is, where are we? We're on the 3-year anniversary of this, the beginning of this war. A lot of people are talking about a major shift that Trump has signifying, that Trump means for Russia and Ukraine. I want to know, what do people need to know about where we are right now? And what also are people getting wrong about where we are?
Liv, you want to start?
No.
I guess that leaves me. Well, look, the in terms of sort of the direction of the war, and Lev, come in anytime here. The first 6 months after Russia's invasion in which was 3 years ago, the first 6 months of that war went very badly for Russia in terms of trying to achieve its objectives, and it's a big hit to its prestige and initially to its economy. And Ukraine really did a pretty amazing job of defending itself and taking advantage of Russia's many mistakes. I'm talking about battlefield mistake. I mean, the mistake was invading, but things were looking great for the whole sort of the Western NATO think tank, U.S. empire land that had thrown everything in with the Ukraine cause and making it, at least in theory, its own cause as well. And then a real turning point, which doesn't get I think, nearly as much play as it should was Putin's decision in September of 2022. So, 6 months into the war, to announce what was called a partial mobilization. It was a big mobilization. It actually achieved beyond, I think, what analysts in the West had expected. And nobody expected, first of all, that he would mobilize, because they thought it would be politically too risky and he didn't want to do it, which is true. I think Putin and the Kremlin didn't want to. But once Russia, which is so much larger than Ukraine and has so much greater production capacity, once they mobilized, that changed everything. And the war has, there were still a few months where it didn't go so well for Russia. Their counteroffensive in August, September of 2022 went quite well. But after the partial mobilization and the introduction of these troops and the recruitment of mercenaries, of contractors, I guess you'd call them, professional soldiers, who are paid very well, that just changed everything. And then there have just been, since then, a series of really catastrophic, disastrous mistakes by both the Ukrainian command, the Ukrainian leadership, the Ukrainian military strategy, and NATO as well. If they were smart, they would have forestalled this war. If they were smart, they would have not gotten in the way of the Istanbul talks a month into the war. And if they were smart in a kind of Thucydides way, they would have found a way to get peace in the fall of 2022, when things were looking best for Ukraine and worse for Russia. But they weren't. So the war right now is at a situation where Ukraine is in a dire strait. It's getting chewed apart for, 2+ years now, just destroyed from within, and all of the weaknesses of the state and the leadership.
Ukraine was never winning. I gotta stop this, but that's nonsense. Ukraine was never winning. Russia was never in a bad position. That's all fictitious. That's the NATO propaganda. He shouldn't be saying that type of nonsense. We all know that the Russian military at one point in the war retreated from certain areas, and that was a mistake for the Ukrainians, because they was devastating the Ukrainian military as the Russians backed up. Something that Zelensky refused to do is ever pull his men back. The Russian military did the right thing, and now they're taking all that territory they ever left. So Russia was never in a bad position. Just see, these people don't know anything about military strategy. Russia is teaching the world how to actually fight a goddamn war and win.
And the profound corruption and the cruelty of this sort of oligarchical system with democratic trappings. It's resulting in what you've seen, which are, daily postings of forced mobilization videos. When you see one video, there's hundreds more behind that one that actually made it, with risk, by the way. These are posted by Ukrainians. It's not little green men running in, filming it and posting it on Russians. These are Ukrainians who are resisting the war, and the resistance is huge.
Can you describe? We're not just talking about them coming in and like asking for your papers. We're talking about just violence.
Oh yeah,
it's kidnapping, is what it is.
Yeah.
Yes, it's like 19th century press gang. It's kidnapping. There was just one post that went around today showing some, and it's of lower middle class Ukrainian males, officially 25 and I don't know, 55, but we're talking, they do get younger and older. They're impressing, people with all kinds of disabilities, blind people, Hare Krishnas. If you've seen the video of a group of Hare Krishnas that were dragged into a recruitment center and forcibly mobilized, and the ones who are forcibly mobilized then get barely trained, and immediately their rent seeking comes into play. So these people have no protection. They're not the people that all advocate for the war and speak English and live in Kyiv or Lvov and have access, to US aid and Soros money and, big accounts and connected with the West. These are people who are very vulnerable, and most Ukrainians are very vulnerable, not just to Russian, but to the predatory Ukrainian state. they're dragged in, you know, barely trained, and officers oftentimes then when they're going towards the front, first they get shaken down in the recruitment center. If you want to get out, you got to come up with a lot of money. And that means they have to hit up all their family members and relatives and everybody. And that money will either be stolen or they can't come up with enough, or sometimes they get out. Those who don't then get sent right up towards the front. People who are already in the military, who have already been fighting, don't want to be in the front line trenches because you get killed there. And sometimes you have a very short lifespan. So you have to pay to keep out of that. And so the commanders are at the top of this racket. And they, of course, have to then pay they have to pay off then other people at the senior level. But there was, like in Ukrainska Pravda, stories. I mean, it's so bad that even the Ukrainian press has been reporting on this. Like, that's how bad it's been all over Ukrainian social media. But I'm saying the Ukrainian official press has talked about it. And there was this one infamous story of an entire brigade or part of a brigade that was only just about shaking down poor people for whatever they and their relatives could cough up. And one guy who wasn't coughing up the money, so the commander who was the head of this mafia, his son was the enforcer within this unit, and he took photos of himself crucifying a guy who couldn't pay. This is all within the Ukrainian military. And to let the others in the unit know what happens to them if they're not paying. Beatings, even killings are not uncommon. I mean, this even made it to the famously free Western press, if you can believe it. They reported on it. Officially, there's somewhere between 80 and 100,000 desertions within the Ukrainian military.
I mean, it is very grim, and
it's so grim.
We will show a video because they are really, I mean, they're really disturbing on a kind of visceral level. Just seeing people who, as you have been saying, just don't want to die.
Yeah, and when you see these people, just remember, all of these people are Ukrainians. Because when Boris Johnson and the Atlantic Council and the U.S. Senate goes up there and says, Ukrainians want to keep fighting. Yeah. Ukrainians, they just can't wait. Okay.
Ukrainian voices. Yeah.
Ukrainian voices. Yeah. The Ukrainian voices that want to keep fighting are the ones that are not fighting. Okay. They're the ones, as Mark said, they're the ones who have connections to USAID and Soros and the rest. So these people, they're the inconvenient Ukrainians, and therefore they're not talked about. But this is what's happening. And the other one thing I was going to say is a lot of these videos are coming out of Western Ukraine. Okay. And that's significant because Western Ukraine is the most anti-Russia region. It's the most nationalistic region. And these videos are coming out of there, which is rather telling.
Right. So it's not just the areas that you'd maybe perhaps expect for there to be more resistance to it.
Oh, that's from today. Yeah, this
got posted today.
Yeah. Knocked him right off the bike. Yeah, and then drag him in. Yeah.
I mean,
the ones that get to me, I have to admit, I mean, all of these get to me, but the ones that really get to me, and this is scary enough. Remember, this is democracy here, right?
Is what Trump and J.D. Vance was telling to Zelensky. Come on, you're dragging conscripts off the street. You're dragging people off the street and forcing them to go fight. All of that, if we just give Ukraine 10 more billion, who are you going to give it to? They're dragging innocent people off the street. You think these people want to fight? It's almost over for Ukraine.
Right? The other side is authoritarianism.
Yeah, right.
This is what George Packer talked about, breathing the air of freedom in Ukraine and all this crap. But the ones that get to me are where you see mothers and wives screaming and crying to leave their husband or leave their son or their brother, surrounding these forced mobilization vans,
playing tug of war with them.
Yeah,
tug of war with them,
like grabbing their limbs,
and these guys screaming at the top of their lungs not to be taken away. They know they're being taken into hell.
No, they're going to die. They will. If they go in there, the chances that they will be dead within weeks are very, very, very high.
Mm-hmm.
Катя, помоги!
Ну, это просто пипец.
Я лежать. Ти що кончений? Я не затриманий.
So it's not like they're just like being put into like a grueling program that they're going to have to say, this is it, goodbye. Like they will be dead.
I mean, what does it say to you that Zelensky feared, imposing a draft? Like this is a country that was invaded, and I think the morale was actually quite high in the first couple months. And they probably, I don't think they actually needed a draft in the first couple of months. They had a lot of volunteers, and the Russians invaded with a small force. I mean, small, I say small, but compared to what the Ukrainians could put up, kind of had this sort of the American attitude with the initial invasion of Iraq, for example. They were undermanned, and that's why they got schooled.
They had parade uniforms in the tanks. I mean, they had like dress uniforms, like ready to. They thought they would be welcomed with flowers.
Yeah.
So very much like Mark said, like very much like Iraq.
Yeah. But what does it say that Zelensky and the Ukrainian, not just Zelensky, but let's say the ruling classes of Ukraine understood that it was very unpopular to and very dangerous to impose a draft, and you could see it in the videos, right? But they had to be coerced and coaxed and bribed. Basically, the $60 billion of aid that Biden was able to get to them. That was the quid pro quo, was then Zelensky will do this very unpopular draft. And it hasn't been very successful. Like I even listened to people like Michael Kaufman, very keyed into the, NATO, very pro-Ukraine think tank world. And he talks about it openly, that the draft has been, as they would say, very disappointing in terms of the numbers they're able to get.
Right. And we actually have one more clip. It's not of people with their mothers or wives, but it's more of this. You get to see more physical resistance. So this is the type of things that people are doing right now. It's really
Militia screaming shame on you to the police.
This is a guy who knows he's going to be killed.
Right. Awful. And you can just imagine if,
this is Karmatsky on video that was, this is the company that was funded by Soros in many ways. So this is what they're showing us now.
With you, have you detected yet, this is only 2 days ago, any fallout from President Trump's confrontation with President Zelensky in the Oval Office in the intelligence community?
Judge, the intelligence community is in flux. People are being let go for good reason. New people are already in there, whether they're actually in the traditional agencies like the CIA and State Department, INR, or not. Tulsi Gabbard is giving the president good advice on Ukraine. Whoa, miracle, miracle. No president has had good advice on Ukraine for a decade or so, okay? So what's happening here is a very salutary development. Somebody has got the word in to Tulsi Gabbard and she to the president, and that's largely informing this. The old kind of CIA, the people who had said, for example, 2 years ago, that Putin had already lost in Ukraine, that his army had been totally discredited. Those people are gone, and good riddance. We'll see who replaces them officially, but even now, and that's the big point, it seems to me, these people at the top of our government are getting good advice on Ukraine and the equities in Europe.
Tell me how the following people react. We have the Ukraine intelligence services largely dependent upon, if you want, poodles of MI6, the British intelligence, and CIA. We have I don't know if they're still there, CIA operatives on the ground in Ukraine, certainly on the ground in Russia. What do these people do now that the policy of the United States of America vis-a-vis Russia and Ukraine is so radically, in your view and mine and the view of people watching us now, happily so different?
Yes, but not in Sir Keir Starmer's view.
Oh no, we're going to play Sir Keir in a few minutes, but
right.
But
But
does he still control MI6? Is MI6 still doing what it was doing when Joe Biden was president?
Apparently so. Now, MI6 is a tool of the prime minister. What Zelensky has left and what's left of his government is only the British. The CIA has been told, obviously, this is the new policy. If the Ukrainians still want to talk to you, fine, but get packed up because you're coming home anyway. They probably won't talk to you. So there's the disconnect between the British, that is MI6, and the CIA. It's reflected by what Sir Keir Starmer's delusionary comments are. And I don't know how long it will take MI6 or anybody else to disabuse this delusional person, but it hasn't happened yet. And by all indications, it's not going to happen for another few weeks or maybe months, or God help us, a year.
Here's exactly what you're talking about. Here is Sir Keir yesterday in London, right after he finished meeting with the heads of state of the major NATO countries that were willing to come to London on a Sunday afternoon. Chris, cut number 1.
Our starting point must be to put Ukraine in the strongest possible position now, so that they can negotiate from a position of strength. And we are doubling down in our support. Yesterday evening, the UK signed a £2.2 billion loan to provide more military aid to Ukraine, backed not by the British taxpayer, but by the profits from frozen Russian assets. And today I'm announcing a new deal, which allows Ukraine to use £1.6 billion of UK export finance to buy more than 5,000 air defence missiles, which will be made in Belfast, creating jobs in our brilliant defence sector. This will be vital for protecting critical infrastructure now and strengthen Ukraine in securing the peace when it comes.
So 2 points. One, how long will it take the defense industry in Belfast to make those missiles? I would think the war will be over by the time they're produced. And 2, did you notice how cavalierly he said proceeds from frozen Russian assets? In other words, they're going to steal the interest on the money and the Russian money in European banks.
Yeah, they're already at that. Whether they succeed in that is another question. There are more sober-minded people in Europe that say, my God, this would create one terrible precedent. So we'll have to see if Sir Keir prevails on that score. The business about Belfast and all the arms producers in Europe, Judge, their stock has gone way up. It's almost as if they bought gold. Okay, to zoom to the sky. What about the defense contractors, the people who have stock in Boeing and Raytheon and Lockheed? Woof, down. Why? Well, peace is bad for business. Now, it's really interesting that Keir Starmer would be so open in saying that, but it's not unprecedented. Back last fall, no, not last fall, the fall before last, okay, when that was about $60 billion more going to be given to Ukraine. Every one of the senators on that Senate committee bragged about the fact, well, we're not giving this money to Ukraine. No, don't be mistaken. We're giving that to arms manufacturers in your district and your district and your district. So the money is staying here. This is a win-win for everyone. The money will be produced here. And there was only one senator in that whole Senate that didn't say that, and that was Chris von Holland from Maryland. It was bizarre. They were so open about it. Oh, this is the industry here. So it's going to be very interesting if they start building weapons. The Russians are going to shoot them down as soon as they get anywhere near Ukraine. The more so if they really follow through on putting peacekeeping troops there. You know, in another part of that interview, Sir Keir says, well, this will only work if we have full U.S. support. Well, hello, you don't have full U.S. support. And the Russians have already said, we're going to shoot you guys up if you show up unannounced. You will be considered a combatant, if you will. So, yeah, the whole thing is very truly delusional.
Here's Sir Keir being even more delusional, offering boots on the ground and planes in the sky. Cut number 2, Chris.
We will go further to develop a coalition of the willing to defend a deal in Ukraine and to guarantee the peace. Not every nation will feel able to contribute, but that can't mean that we sit back. Instead, those willing will intensify planning now with real urgency. The UK is prepared to back this with boots on the ground and planes in the air. Together with others, Europe must do the heavy lifting. But to support peace in our continent and to succeed, this effort must have strong US backing. We're working with the US on this point after my meeting with President Trump last week. And let me be clear, we agree with the President on the urgent need for a durable peace. Now we need to deliver together.
It's almost as if he had blinders on and cotton in his ears during his meeting with the president. And it's almost as if he's ignorant of what happened in the Oval Office with President Zelensky on Friday afternoon. We're going to put boots on the ground and planes in the air, but we can't do it without U.S. support. You're not going to get U.S. support. Go ahead.
Delusional is the word. Now, you don't have to be very old to go back to 2003. Coalition of the Willing. Does that ring any bells? Ring any bells?
Yeah.
So we had the British and the United States trying desperately to get Security Council approval for attacking Iraq. They couldn't do it. Why? Because the British and the French said, this is BS. There are no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Count us out. And so what did our intelligence services do? Well, as Catherine Gunn has exposed, they doubled their coverage, electronic snooping on all the members of the UN Security Council. That order came out at the end of January 2003. So they hastened their efforts to make sure they could compromise enough people to get that resolution passed, and they miserably failed. And so what do we end up with? A coalition of the winning Britain, the US, and then Micronesia and Papua New Guinea, and the other normal people that you put on the list. So this all has a really smelly ring. Now, there's more delusion here, because there's no way that these people can prevail over Russia. And Obama himself said that, as I've said many times on this. I don't know where the delusion comes. Trump has gotten out of this delusion. These guys in Europe, not yet. And there don't seem to be any stalwart, experienced non-political hacks ruling places like France and Germany anymore. So there's trouble ahead if they go ahead with these crazy schemes. I think Trump is going to call them on it publicly, like he did to Zelensky, and it'll all kind of fall apart. And the British and the others will say, well, we tried to support Ukraine for as long as it takes. And then Trump pulled the rug out from under us. That's the game here.
If Trump calls up Tulsi Gabbard this morning and says, I want to know who said what about me in London yesterday, would she be able to inform him? Stated differently, did the CIA surveil the meeting of the heads of European states in London, which produced this absurd statement from Sir Keir that we just ran?
We surveil everything, Judge. CIA and the Five Eyes, in this case, Four Eyes, because the British would be excluded. We pick up everything we can. Now, that's the question. Can we pick everything up? My friend Bill Binney from NSA, a former technical director, says, Ray, trust me, we can. And because we can, we do. Now, whether their capabilities extend to penetrating complex security devices like these inner sanctums, well, that's another question. But, they get to talking to some of these people. There will be ways to get the information. But, these days, it's pretty clear from what people say, delusionary people like Sir Keir Starmer, what the game is all about. Nice little snippets of intercepted conversations are nice to have, but almost never do they actually say anything different from what you can glean from public statements.
Do the European elites, in your view, actually fear a Russian invasion? And if so, do their intelligence services feed that fear?
No and no. It's a case of, in some cases, like Kaja Kallas, the foreign minister, so to speak, of the EU. She said so often, and the people in her home country have said so often, the Russians are going to invade the Baltics, they're going to invade the Baltics like the Germans did, and that the Russians, that she may believe it, but it's delusionary. Now, there are people in Washington that promote this idea. What's her name? Fiona Hill, big student of the Harvard's Richard Pipe. The Russians are coming. The Russians are coming. She was head of intelligence. She was right under what is now the DNI, and she said in an op-ed just about a year and a half ago, Putin wants to drive all the U.S. out of Europe, and he wants to be able to say, look, don't let the door hit your backside on the way out. Op-ed, New York Times. So that's still around. Trump is not having any of it. Thank God for people like Tulsi Gabbard, who has her head screwed on right. And for those, and I have to confess, they may be reading our stuff, but I don't have any confirmation of that. They have some other people who are as enlightened about things in Europe as we pretend to be, we veteran intelligence professionals for sanity. And so I'm kind of very optimistic that Trump will prevail on this. There will be an agreement on peace in Ukraine. And it's just a damn shame that this couldn't have happened back in April of 2022, just 6 weeks after the whole thing started.
Do NATO members admit privately that they cannot pull this off, establish the security of Ukraine and resistance to the Russian military without the United States?
Well, Judge, yeah, they do, of course. And Starmer, you just heard, admitted publicly. Well, we can't, we have to have the full support of the United States on this. Well, he was just told the U.S. is not in this game anymore, and the Russians are going to shoot you up if you send those peacekeepers into Ukraine. So, yeah, they say it privately as well as publicly. Try to have a little, I guess that's all I want to say on that.
Is there substantial resistance in Europe, as far as you know, to Trump's turning the tables 180 degrees on Ukraine and Russia vis-a-vis the U.S.?
Yeah, well, Annalena Baerbock has just said it's 360 degrees, Judge. Remember her famous saying, oh, this changed 360 degrees. Well, of course, she's wrong. It is 180 degrees. And so, yeah, the elites are whistling in the dark. They tell themselves about a world that doesn't exist anymore, the more so since the US is out of this particular world. So the elites feel that way. Now, how about the people? Well, look at that election in Germany just 1 week ago. My God, Merz can't even govern with a majority just now. Between the AfD and Die Linke, they've got blocking power over anything he wants to do. So that was an election. That was a plebiscite. That was the people speaking. So the people are beginning to realize what happened to them, how their economic and other interests have been sacrificed, how they can't sell any cars anymore in Germany, for God's sake. They got to go to China. They're beginning to realize that they've been done dirty by their leaders. How long it will take to have a new 1848 Europe-wide revolution? Well, I don't think it'll be next month, but maybe April.
Here's, Trump is not the only one whose mind has been changed on this. I realize that Secretary of State Rubio works for the president. But here's a rather startling Marco Rubio yesterday with George Stephanopoulos. Chris?
Why is it okay to call President Zelensky Why is it okay to call President Zelensky a dictator, but not, as you say, call Vladimir Putin names?
Listen, we've spent 3 years calling Vladimir Putin names. That's not the point. The point that we're at now is we're trying to get the man to a table, the Russians. And I've said from the very beginning, maybe they don't want a deal either. We don't know, but we haven't talked to them in 3 years, but maybe they do. The point is, do we want to make, I would ask everybody this, if there are no negotiations, what is the alternative? Another 4 years of war, another 3 years of war in which the United States and Europe continues to pour billions of dollars into a war in Ukraine? Is that the alternative? I've asked every foreign minister I meet with, tell me your idea of how this turns out. Most don't have a plan. A few have said, well, let's give them another year of fighting. A year from now, a year later, after another year of death, another year of destruction, then maybe Putin will be ready to negotiate at that point. That doesn't sound like a good plan to me, and it certainly is not a plan the president's on board with.
I give him credit. He works for Donald Trump. That's 180 degrees. I keep using that phrase, forgive me, from where he was a year ago, even 6 months ago. But that's where he is now, and that's where the State Department is now, and that's the personification of the foreign policy of the United States of America. He was seated right there next to Vice President Vance when that incident occurred on Friday.
Sure. Well, Trump has picked these people because they're going to do what Trump tells them to do. Now, Rubio has a very fungible kind of outlook on the world, but if Trump tells him to say these things and to believe these things, well, he started coming around months ago when he talked about, look, the bipolar world is bipolar. It's gone. We've got a multipolar world here, and we've got to sort of deal with that. Rubio said that. Now, what you showed there with respect to Rubio is really, really interesting. But more interesting for me is the real fly in this ointment. People like George Stephanopoulos, okay? What that interview reminded me of when James McDermott, Democrat from the state of Washington, went to Baghdad, looked around, talked to everybody, and on a live Sunday show with Stephanopoulos says, so, Representative McDermott, you're saying that there's no evidence of weapons of mass destruction there in Baghdad? And McDermott says, yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, my God, how can you say that? So McDermott comes home. Of course, McDermott was absolutely right. He was listening to other people. And I know a couple of other people who were listening to it, right? So he turns out to be right. George Stephanopoulos, far from being discredited or pushed aside, he's making really big bucks by challenging people like Romeo. Now, why can't you call Putin a dictator, for God's sake? Well, I tell you, Putin is no more dictator than many other leaders of many other countries. He was elected, and his approval rating hovers between 70 and 80%. And
Right.
those are trusted polls. So, call him a dictator if you like. What the hell is that going to accomplish?
Ray McGovern, a pleasure, my dear man. I love it when you're passionate. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll look forward to seeing you on Friday at the end of the week with Larry Johnson. Thank you, Ray. All the best.
Most welcome, Judge.
Thank you. And coming up at 11. Afternoon. But first, this.
No, we don't want to fight in another war in the Middle East that could cost us dearly and result in the loss of millions of lives. Too many lives have been squandered at this point. We don't want to lose any more. If we're going to fight, let's find a damn good reason to do so. Today, that does not exist for us in the Middle East. So give it some thought. Tell the people that are in Washington what you feel, what you think. Believe me, you have an impact. And we will join together with other organizations. Some of them may be where you live. Organizations that involve veterans and many other good citizens who are equally concerned about the potential for the war in the Middle East to spread. We don't want that. We want a powerful United States that is prosperous, but we want peace abroad. And we can't build up this nation to what it should be unless we have peace abroad. We have the border to think about. We have illegal immigration to think about and criminality here at home to think about. We need to act on those. Tell the people that represent you in the House, in the Senate, at your local level. This is where we want to focus. Our focus and Operation Focus is very clear. We are opposed to another large regional war in the Middle East. We don't want to be part of it. We don't need it. And we think it's the wrong war in the wrong place for all the wrong reasons. Thank you.
Well, Colonel, you did not know we were going to run that, and you sent that to me, and I was so impressed with it that I thought we would air it for you. What is the war in the Middle East? What is the likelihood of war in the Middle East? Who would be the combatants? How would this come about? What do you fear there, Colonel?
Well, first of all, thank you, Judge. I appreciate that. My concern right now, today, is that Prime Minister Netanyahu has cut off water, food, sustenance to the people living in Gaza in the ruins. And this happens during a period that they call Ramadan. In other words, these are holy days. Now, this is not the first time this has happened, but right now this is extremely dangerous for the lives of the people who are clinging tenaciously to life in Gaza. But it is also pushing the Arab states in the region to the point where they cannot help but declare war and fight Israel. This has become the cause célèbre throughout the Islamic world. Right now, Egypt has poured more than 50,000 troops into the Sinai in close proximity to the border with Israel. And I think this is conceivably the last straw. Tomorrow, all of the Arab states will meet in Cairo, and they will discuss their plan to resolve the Gaza crisis. In other words, a plan to rebuild Gaza. And I think it will be presented effectively as an ultimatum to Mr. Netanyahu. Now, it could be that the Israelis decide to strike before they become the targets themselves. They've done that before. But I think they'll find that the Arab states are actually ready for that. And the Arab states will ultimately, if this is rejected, they will fight Israel. And I don't think it will stop there. I think Jordan will be pulled into this unavoidably. I think this will involve Syria, where in southern Syria, all the way up to Damascus, the Israelis have essentially declared a buffer state under their control. This is a provocation to the Turks, and I think the Turks will find it impossible to avoid conflict with Israel. And at the same time, the Iranians and the Egyptians are close, and the Iranians have said that they will stand by Egypt. And obviously, the Crown Prince in Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, is close to President Sisi. Again, I think you're going to see unity across the region and across the Islamic world. And this is the last thing that I think we as Americans and frankly Israelis should want to see. We want Israel to survive. And this is a prescription for destruction that once unleashed could consume Israel completely. And it'll do a lot of damage to us. We can't even begin to talk about what happens at home in the markets, to our economy, the financial system, and ultimately behind Iran, and I think increasingly Egypt, we will find Russia, because the Russians have no interest in seeing these countries destroyed by Israel or us. This is what I'm concerned about, because President Trump has just led us courageously down the path of peace in Ukraine, and it will happen. And I think President Trump got a foretaste of what he's going to get from those who have pushed this terrible, evil proxy war under the leadership of this criminal regime in Kiev.
But the war hawks and the neocons and the Zionists and Biden, they have set so many traps for Trump that it's wars all over the battlefield. See, the Israelis can save Ukraine by forcing Russia's hand in the Middle East. That pull Ukraine ass out the fire for a little while if all hell breaks loose in the Middle East, which they want to happen. Very dangerous situation.
I think he's going to brush that aside. He's going to make peace with the Russians, and we're going to find a way forward together. But this could also be jeopardized if something is not done to arrest these forces that are running out of control in the Middle East. So that's pretty much in a nutshell what I see happening.
Well, thank you for that explanation, but it seems to me that it's politically impossible for him to brush aside Netanyahu because of the political influence that Netanyahu's allies and colleagues have here in the United States, both donors and members of Congress and members of the president's administration and members of the president's inner circle. If the Arab League or if select Arab countries attack Israel because of its now genocidal behavior against the Palestinians, and the law defines the denial of food and water and medication as a war crime, would you expect the United States to get involved in that conflagration? In other words, would the effect on the United States be more than economic? Would it be military?
Yes, unfortunately I do, because I think the trigger is already set. In other words, we've cooperated closely with the Israelis, and I think the predisposition is to automatically launch whatever aircraft, missiles, air and naval power is required, perhaps special operations forces on the ground. We have been beefing up our positions in the region. Large numbers of National Guardsmen have been sent over there because the Army today is too small to operate without the Guard and the Reserve. They are all going to be at risk. Americans will ultimately be drawn into this. I don't think there's a way to avoid it. However, I would simply point out that President Trump is still the commander in chief of the United States Armed Forces, and he is the leader of the United States. He is the head of state. And regardless of whatever pressures are exerted on him, he is in a position to take decisions that his own supporters in some areas may not care for. And ultimately, that's something presidents have to be prepared to do. Wouldn't you say,
Right.
Judge?
Yes, yes, I fervently hope so, particularly in this instance. Is Egypt alone preparing for war against Israel? Are there indications? You know armor, you know tanks, that is your field. Are there indications that the Egyptians are preparing to invade?
I think there are. I think there are several things happening. One, you're going to see targets inside Israel involving airplanes, aircraft, airfields, air defenses undoubtedly will come under attack. And there will be an attempt to move rapidly around the southern area of Gaza and across the desert straight into urbanized Israel. In other words, in the direction of Tel Aviv. So I'm sure that that's under consideration. I imagine they've planned for it. There have been some statements by Egyptian generals to that effect. Now, can they do that? Well, I'm sure they'll be opposed. And much depends on their own air defenses. Because if we've learned anything from Ukraine, it is that if you do not have effective air and missile defense, no matter what you put on the ground, it's at risk. And now you can move quickly in a tank, especially in that part of the world, very, very quickly, cover a lot of distance in a short period of time. But that's not enough. Israel will ultimately be compelled to fight in more than one direction at once. And I think that will happen with other Arab states. I don't see how Jordan holds itself together without joining this tragic war. I think it's very unlikely that southern Syria will sit quietly and wait for something to happen. I think HTS and its Turkish backers will become involved. And then, of course, in addition to that, you have Iran. And Iran doesn't have much incentive anymore to think that it's going to receive some sort of special treatment from Washington. That, in fact, they see every piece of evidence tells them that Washington is solidly behind Israel. And they may decide they have no incentive to exercise any restraint, in which case they could level large parts of Israel very quickly. You know, remember, thousands and thousands of these 2,000-pound bombs have now been delivered. Israel is replenished with all these lethal munitions from the air. They've got a lot of artillery ammunition now they didn't have before. So this is a tinderbox. This is waiting to explode.
Colonel, is there or will there be an impetus for war on the governments of Arab countries by the populace? Jordan,
yes.
Egypt, Turkey.
Yes, there's no doubt about it. It can reach the point where public rage is so overwhelming that the people in charge fear their removal, brutal removal, if they do not act. Because we know that the elites in the region, particularly the Arab elites and the Iranian elites, do not want a war. But I'm not sure they have much choice in the matter at this stage, particularly in view of what Mr. Netanyahu did this morning.
When you say what he did this morning, you mean announcing that he's cutting off food, water, and medicine to Gaza?
Yes, this is a direct affront to the Islamic world. It's during Ramadan, and the population there has already been beaten, bombed, and suppressed to the point where their position is practically hopeless, which of course was the Israeli goal. But this kind of mistreatment and brutality has now spread to the West Bank. All of this is known in the Islamic world. We in the West, as you know, Judge, don't really get a big picture of this. We only get brief snapshots.
Here is what Prime Minister Netanyahu said. This is about a minute long. It has to be so thoughtless and vicious and indifferent to human life that they would make and even to their own security, that they would make a decision like this during Ramadan. But let's watch what he said first, and then I'll elicit your comments.
Upon the conclusion of the first stage, and in light of Hamas' rejection of the Witkoff framework, we decided at last night's discussion that as of this morning, the entry of goods and supplies into Gaza will be prevented. It must be emphasized, Hamas currently controls all of the supplies and goods that are being sent to the Gaza Strip. It is abusing the Gazan population that is trying to receive the aid. It is shooting at them and is turning the humanitarian aid into a budget for terrorism directed against us. To this, we will not agree in any way. If Hamas continues to stick to its position and does not release our hostages, there will be additional consequences, which I will not detail here. As of today, we have returned 196 hostages, and I remind you that at the start of the war, there were those who doubted our ability to return even one hostage.
Well, there you have it. He's indifferent to human life. He's been indifferent to human life his entire adult career. They don't care how many people die. What is the United States going to do about this? Probably nothing.
Well, let's say he's indifferent to the lives of people who are not Israeli Jews.
Right.
Let's be specific about that. I'm sure he's very concerned about the lives of Israeli Jews. Probably not enough in my judgment, since I would argue that pushing the Arab states up against the wall to the point where they have no choice but to act themselves, it will lead to this larger conflagration that could involve the destruction of Israel itself. And I don't think he believes that, but I think that's a real danger. I'm not anxious to see Israel be destroyed. I'm not an enemy of Israel. But he's made it impossible for the Muslims in the region to cooperate with him. And this statement is laced with a lot of things that are simply false. But it doesn't make any difference because he trades in falsehoods routinely. There's a one-way street. It's his way or the highway. And so I think war now is inevitable.
Let's transition, Colonel, to the events in the Oval Office and the White House on Friday afternoon. What is your take on the fallout, that is the view of those events now, 2 days later, 3 days later?
I think we're dealing with a dialogue of the deaf. No one's listening to anybody. Now, I think this will pass, but for the moment, this was so badly orchestrated, so badly staged, and I mean that normally anyone who's been in this business and seen events like this involving heads of state knows that you do not bring them together for a presentation to the press in, of all places, the Oval Office, unless arrangements have been made in advance that are conducive to a harmonious meeting. In other words, someone must have said, and I don't know, I think the Secretary of State is the individual that set this up. Someone must have said, well, we have an agreement. We're going to agree on these economic matters. And he is ultimately going to go along with us in terms of ending the war. Turned out that neither was true. And Zelensky, who showed up in costume, the man should have been in a suit and tie to meet the president of the United States in the White House. But he shows up in his costume and then berates the president in public. It's outrageous. I'm surprised that he was not removed instantly by the Secret Service. Should have been. Overseas, those who are globalists, who oppose peace under any circumstances with Russia, who are determined to destroy Russia and want to sabotage our effort at normalization, have come out and said, no, Zelensky's a hero and we're going to support him to the bitter end and we're going to send him all this aid and equipment. Well, that's all fugazi, Judge. Right. It's just fugazi. They have nothing to send. This is a joke, and that will become increasingly clear. From the Russian standpoint, they're not paying much attention to the Europeans. They know the facts. They're much more interested in normalization with us because they know ultimately the Europeans will come along with us. And it's inevitable that they will, because they too, their populations share our interest in peace, prosperity, and stability in Europe.
Right.
The only way to get there is to follow President Trump's lead.
The clash between the two of them and Vice President Vance was a little stomach churning, but the fundamentals of the war remain the same, Colonel, which is the Russians are on the cusp of victory, the Ukrainians are on the cusp of ending up with no military, and the United States is still sending substantial military supplies to them, authorized by the prior conference, but President Trump has not turned off the spigot.
Well, that's a huge problem, because if you're sitting in Moscow and you want to do business with us, and it's very clear that that's the case with President Putin and Foreign Minister Lavrov, the first thing that must happen is that President Trump, and I would hope now in light of this destructive meeting, he immediately ends any further military aid and assistance to Ukraine. No more. Stop immediately. And then secondly, I would tell everyone who is an American citizen in Ukraine, whether they are military, intelligence, or simply diplomatic, doesn't make any difference. Contractors, get out. Leave the country immediately, because this man, Zelensky, presides over a thugocracy run by this vicious secret police and these neo-Nazis. And I would not at all put it past them to start harming American citizens who have been helping them. So I would get them out immediately as well.
Do NATO members, as far as you have a grasp on them, speak privately about whether NATO can continue to exist or the members can provide security guarantees for Ukraine without the United States?
Behind the scenes, there have been truthful discussions for the last couple of years, and I'm sure that they have reached the point now where very few people believe that NATO can continue in its current form. In the meantime, President Trump has taken steps to remove forces from Germany, to begin closing bases there. He's quite serious about this. He was serious 4 years ago when I met him in the Oval Office in 2020. He made it very clear that was his goal. He's correct. He wants to move in the right direction. He wants Europe to be its own first responder, and that can be done. But he has now broken with the globalists, because the globalists have been perpetrating this false narrative that depicts Russia as evil incarnate. They are not. They are not Cold War Russia. They are not Soviet communists. They are Russians. And they want an end to this war as badly as anybody else. They have no desire to march further west. That doesn't mean they will not if their security is at risk. They simply want their legitimate security interests recognized. And that's what President Trump has set out to do, just as they recognize our legitimate security interests and those of the Europeans. They want an Austrian-style neutrality for Ukraine. That has worked brilliantly in Central Europe. It can work brilliantly in Ukraine. And I think President Trump knows that. It's a matter of time now for the Europeans to sober up and come to terms with reality. But their populations are way ahead of the governments. Even Tusk in Poland, who is hardly an opponent of globalism, he is a globalist, has said under no circumstances would Polish troops contribute to any peacekeeping force in Ukraine. Well, hallelujah, thank God. It's time to get this out in the open, but an end to this nonsense. The Fugazi is in London. The Fugazi is in Paris. And I see no evidence that the Germans want anything to do with that nonsense.
After his debacle in the White House, President Zelensky flew to London, where he was given a very significant and ostentatious welcome. And then President Macron and others flew to London, and they all met on Sunday. The most absurd comment at the end of which was from Prime Minister Starmer. I ask for your patience, not on its length, it's less than a minute, but on what he said. Chris, cut number 2.
We will go further to develop a coalition of the willing to defend a deal in Ukraine and to guarantee the peace. Not every nation will feel able to contribute, but that can't mean that we sit back. Instead, those willing will intensify planning now with real urgency. The UK is prepared to back this with boots on the ground and planes in the air. Together with others, Europe must do the heavy lifting. But to support peace in our continent and to succeed, this effort must have strong US backing. We're working with the US on this point after my meeting with President Trump last week. And let me be clear, we agree with the President on the urgent need for a durable peace. Now we need to deliver together.
It's almost as if he lives in another world. He's going to put troops on the ground, planes in the air, and somehow thinks Trump will back him up.
Yeah, well, all 12 fighter jets in the Royal Air Force. This is just nonsensical. Imagine that Starmer is in a skimpy bathing suit without any clothes on, standing on a board that is 15 meters high over a pool that is shark infested. And the board is shaky and about to crack. And he is saying that we are prepared to eliminate all the sharks in the pool and restore greatness. It's nonsense. It's not going to happen. The British Treasury market, they call them gilts, is in serious trouble. The British Precious Metals Exchange, which involves the gold exchange in London, is in trouble. The country is in trouble. And he is not in a position to ship billions of pounds into the black hole of corruption and incompetence in Ukraine. He knows it. He needs to stop talking about it. I give Starmer 2 weeks, 3 weeks at the most. He's not going to survive this. He's in the same position Liz Truss was when she took over and then started talking about Thatcherism, and the gilt market erupted and she was quickly ushered off stage. They barely held the financial system together. This time around, it's going to be very difficult to do so. And I think behind closed doors, Starmer was asking for assistance in that regard that we can probably give to a limited extent, but we can't bail them out any more than we can bail ourselves out, because we too are facing a similar dilemma in the financial system in the United States. So I think we've had a series of prime ministers. They all want to sound like Churchill, and they want to be heroic figures and posture for the public. But they forget that Winston Churchill bankrupted Britain, destroyed national power of Britain, and ultimately destroyed the British Empire. So they better sober up, because they're about to destroy what's left of Britain if they don't stop.
Are you of the view that if President Zelensky had said publicly he's in favor of a ceasefire, something the Russians would never agree to, his own presidency, such as it is, or even his life, would be jeopardized upon his return to Ukraine?
I think Zelensky's life's been at risk for a long time, and he owes a great deal to MI6 and the CIA and mercenaries that protect him. There's no future for Zelensky. The Russians regard him as fundamentally illegitimate. Putin, whether you like him or not, won an election with 88% of the vote. Now, people will scoff at that. They better stop, because it's real. Zelensky, I don't think, could get elected to be dog catcher in Ukraine. They need a new government. Again, I think some thought should be given to bringing Ambassador Saluzhny. This was the Ukrainian general that was sent off to be ambassador in London after he was severely wounded. He may be someone with whom the Russians are willing to sit down and talk, but Zelensky is not one of them. He has no credibility at all. And that's why President Putin and Foreign Minister Lavrov are delighted to talk with President Trump and his team. They want to bring an end to it. And we need to go back to what we were discussing before, and it will stop. And I think the Europeans will get on board. But this nonsense with Starmer just needs to be dismissed as more fugazi. It's not real. It's not rooted in reality.
Last question, or last subject matter. When do you see the war in Ukraine ending?
I think it will end exactly as Foreign Minister Lavrov said it would, on Russian terms. And I've been saying that for the last couple of years. And the Russians have made these terms very clear. They're not unreasonable, in my judgment, by any stretch of the imagination. And they've sacrificed 100,000 dead. They're not going to give up what they have won, and the Russian population in eastern Ukraine doesn't want them to leave. So I think that's a done deal. We need to get on with it and accept it. But the longer this takes, the more Ukrainians will die needlessly, and the further the Russians will move, and of necessity subsequently decide they need more and more space as a buffer against a Ukraine that they may not trust to ever be truly neutral. That's where we come in. We have to be the ones that make it abundantly clear that Ukraine will be neutral, and we can do that. Eisenhower did that for Austria. Trump can do that for Ukraine.
Colonel McGregor, thank you very much. Thank you for that wonderful clip.
This is Dabu 7. I want to share with you here some footage and some information connected to Myrtle Beach, as right now they have declared a state of emergency as they continue to fight this massive fire that you see right here, one of which we don't have an exact cause of how it started. Here is another angle.
Okay. So, we got one of the structures in danger at this time. We got a can line, lit fire, and jet gun ready.
And a daytime clip here showing them fighting this blaze as it spreads. It should also be known that there is this plan that has been launched by Myrtle Beach to become a smart city. This was rolled out in September of 2024. It's over here on the Smart Cities World Initiative page, where you guys can check all this out, the information connected to it, showing that there is a plan in motion to change up this entire city. I've also got a clip here of them blasting this in the news, kind of telegraphing what is to come from Myrtle Beach, talking about changing it into Meta Beach.
Plans to turn Myrtle Beach into Meta Beach. It's all part of making the city a smart city using new advanced technology. Our Ali Espinosa joins us live from downtown Myrtle Beach tonight. And Ali, city staff are actually calling this the fourth industrial revolution. Talk about the ultimate upgrade. So what does that mean for us here in Myrtle Beach?
Rachel, the overall goal is to improve our quality of life here in Myrtle Beach, and city staff say they're working to do that through new technology, and it's all starting right here in downtown Myrtle Beach.
Myrtle Beach.
Myrtle Beach. It's the second fastest growing city in the entire country. From its 60-mile beach to hosting one of the biggest country music festivals, Myrtle Beach is no doubt an area that has a lot to offer, and plans to bring it to the next level are ahead.
What we're looking to do, or what we're trying to do here, is create an urban environment where technology can help us improve our experiences, whether it's the services you receive from your local government, the experiences you have as a tourist in our town or a visitor in our town, but also, how we conduct business with our businesses.
Myrtle Beach Chief Innovation Officer Howard Waldy IV says he's been working to make Myrtle Beach a smart city since March of 2022. They're teaming up with Jennifer Hotai, co-founder of Osverse and Grand Strand Web3 Guild. Their teams are wanting to make the city more advanced to improve the quality of life for you and your family and any Myrtle Beach visitors.
And as you can see, this is the plan to transform Myrtle Beach into a smart city. What are the odds we have this massive fire bearing down on the whole region, wiping everything out, and we have plans for a smart city in the region? And you just heard they're going to call this Meta Beach. And don't get it twisted. They're trying to push it like it's going to be some great thing, some advancement to help everyone's lives. But what it's really set up to do is to track and trace your every move. Join me on the live streams where I break this down in greater detail, going live Monday, Wednesday, and Friday night.
We are going to be looking at some disturbing videos, strange and odd news stories, and as always, let's go ahead and get right into today's video. We are only 3 months into 2025, and there have been a lot of crazy news stories in just these 3 months. But 2024 has had its share of crazy news stories as well, strange and mysterious news stories that I feel still to this day have no proper conclusion. Now, the very first strange news story of 2024 that we are going to go ahead and get into is the freighter that struck an object in Lake Superior.
A freighter carrying iron ore is taking on water in Lake Superior. The Coast Guard says the ship hit something underwater just before 7 o'clock this morning, about 35 miles southwest of Isle Royale, Michigan. That's an island closer to Minnesota near the U.S.-Canadian border. Half of the crew has been evacuated for safety. The ship is 689 feet long. It is now on its way to a port for inspection and repairs.
So what is so strange about this story? Because ships can sink, they can collide with things. That's not a conspiracy. But back on June of 2024, the United States Coast Guard received a report at 6:53 in the morning from the 689 Michipicoten that they collided with something underwater and are taking on water. And this was approximately 35 miles southwest of Isle Royale, Lake Superior. Where they were 35 miles out is a good distance. That would mean by that distance, Lake Superior would be very deep, rolling out any rocks. It is also very important to note that the crew on the Michipicoten were experienced, and they also used the word collided, which is very important because the word collided is a nautical term meaning to strike a stationary object. Researching this further, Lake Superior is the world's largest freshwater lake. It also is the coldest and deepest of the Great Lakes with a maximum depth of 1,332 feet. Again, it's huge. The ship had departed from Two Harbors, Minnesota on Friday, bound for Thunder Bay in Canada, when it received a 13-foot gash shortly before 7 a.m. The crew was forced to use water pumps to displace the floodwater. Their actions managed to reduce the listing from 15 degrees to 5 degrees by 9:15 a.m. And still by that time, they were still using the word collided. They still believe they collided with a stationary object. The United States Coast Guard of the Great Lakes sent out this tweet, again confirming that the Michipicoten did indeed collide with a stationary object. The Michipicoten was carrying low-grade iron ore taconite, and as time progressed, the story would slowly change. But the very next day, that Saturday, the cause of the flooding was still unknown. By all accounts, they still could not find the object that they smashed into that caused a 13-foot gash in the ship. Lauren Thomas, the Externals Affairs Division Chief for the 9th Coast Guard District, was quoted as saying that investigators will probe whether the hull was damaged by running aground, hitting a fixed or floating object, suffering a hull failure, or perhaps a combination of various factors. Even these news agencies started to notice that the story was slowly beginning to change because they would put in their articles earlier, the United States Coast Guard of the Great Lakes said that the ship had struck something underwater. What's even more curious is that there were articles that came out and there were a couple of interviews that came out that stated that the ship, before it made this collision, actually diverted off of its course. And then this was never expanded upon. There was no follow-ups as to why this ship had diverted.
That was a 1,000-foot ship that diverted off of its track.
As time was still progressing and the story was making its way around the airways and still yet no plausible answer, of course, people are going to begin to speculate, and they did. The incident has sparked speculation online about the possible unidentified submerged object, the USO, the nautical equivalent of a UFO. Users on X posted various theories online, many of them tongue-in-cheek, as they discussed the incident. The water 35 miles southwest of Isle Royale is 600 feet deep. I wonder what the Michipicoten collided with underwater, one wrote. Another commentator responded, maybe Elon's rescue sub, referring to a submarine created by mogul Elon Musk. Another suggested the bottom of the lake was a watery graveyard for abandoned cars. So again, a lot of people were talking, coming up with different theories. News agencies were also interested in this story, sending emails out to the Coast Guard for further answers. And we can't forget that the Great Lakes also have a lot of mysteriousness and strangeness that surrounds them. A lot of odd stories come out of the Great Lakes. This story was also a couple months after the anomaly on Bouvet Island that kept appearing. You can see this news article here that says it's not the first time that a USO mystery has gripped ocean fans. In April, a wave modeling website suggested a huge underwater object was moving at incredible speeds alongside the African coast. There was also an object that kept appearing over Lake Michigan as well. As more time then progressed and there still wasn't any answers, this is where we started to hear something different. Lieutenant Joe Snyder of the United States Coast Guard came out and said an underwater collision still can't be 100% ruled out, but the gash in the ship's hull is likely due to a stress fracture. None of the crew members on the Michipicoten ever gave a public statement as to what happened. The only ones speaking on the subject were high up in the United States Coast Guard. And at that time, the damaged Michipicoten was laid up at Kiefer Terminal in Thunder Bay. Investigators from the United States and Canada were trying to figure out what went wrong, and they were investigating it further. But still, to this day, there's never been an answer as to what happened to this ship. They say it's very likely that it was a stress fracture from the taconite, but they're not 100% sure. And if it did indeed hit something, they don't know what that something is or was. One would think that this experienced crew on the Michipicoten would know the difference between a stress fracture and colliding with a stationary object. With there being no concrete answers and the way the story was swept under the rug and forgotten about, the crew members not being able to speak on the subject, a lot of people feel like the ship collided with a UFO or perhaps an enemy submarine or something else altogether that exists under Lake Superior that they don't want us to know actually exist. Because again, a couple weeks prior to this story, this massive object was seen on radar over Lake Michigan. So is it possible this same object traveled over to Lake Superior, or perhaps another one of these objects exists under Lake Superior, whatever this object could be? But here's something even more interesting. The Michipicoten may have collided with something because it's never been confirmed on June 8th, 2024. On that exact same day, 2 kayakers went missing on Lake Superior. That is right, very interesting coincidence. This article was published on June 8th, 2024, and it says, the search for 2 people who went missing Saturday afternoon, June 8th, after a boat capsized in Keweenaw Bay resumed Monday morning. The Michigan State Police says its Marine Services unit located the capsized boat and both missing people involved with it Monday afternoon. The victims were deceased and located in an area nearly 220 feet in depth in Lake Superior. No more came from this story either. Nobody knows what caused this boat to capsize. There was actually a fishing tournament taking place that same day, and the waters were fine. Only hours after the Michipicoten perhaps collided with something on Lake Superior, this boat capsizes and both people on board lose their lives. There is also something strange about this news story when it comes to the numerology as well that makes me feel like there's something more at play here than meets the eye. On the Michipicoten itself, the ship, there were exactly 22 crew members. The 2 individuals that had capsized, well, there was 2 of them, and they were found exactly in 220 feet of water. What is up with all the 2s? And there have been no more updates to either story. Let us go ahead and move on with our next bizarre news story of 2024, and this would be the strange case of Kyle Effinger.
Officers found him unconscious inside the engine's intake cowling. And that there was a medical emergency on the de-icing pad, and then the police showed up. Across the tarmac, Nelson used her cell phone to zoom in on the body she saw lying underneath the engine. As a nurse, I know what it looks like when people are doing compressions. When I looked out the window and I zoomed in, I could see somebody going up and down. She says first responders did CPR for about 20 minutes. They put his body into an ambulance, and the ambulance didn't drive away. And I know that if that happens, then they're no longer living. She flies out of Salt Lake International often. It's a big airport, and there's a lot of people coming in and out. And I don't know how they don't have more security breaches. She calls the incident bizarre and said she's sorry for Effinger's family. Kind of makes you wonder what happened.
This story is odd for a couple of reasons. For one, Kyle Effinger, 30, of Park City, passed away on New Year's Day after climbing into the turbine of an aircraft which was awaiting takeoff at Salt Lake City International Airport with 100 people on board. Now, the thing is, they say they found him inside the turbine, the engine of the plane. Now, if that was the case, they would not find anything left of Kyle Effinger. There have been many stories that have come out of maintenance workers being sucked into the engines, into the turbine blades of the planes, and they are basically reduced to soup. They're that powerful. While any plane is waiting for takeoff, the engines are definitely on. So that being said, the question happens to be, how were police, investigators, and rescuers able to find Kyle Effinger's body in one piece and still alive when he basically should have been reduced to particles? This is the video footage that has come out of Kyle Effinger inside the airport acting very erratic. Now, prior to this, prior to him running out to the terminal, there was other news that had come out that people noticed that he was located in other terminals acting very erratic as well. So the question happens to be, where was security? So as you can see on the camera, you can see Kyle Effinger acting erratic, but what's even more interesting is towards the end, you can see the plane inching towards him as he's running on the tarmac, and that's where the camera stops. We never once see Kyle getting inside any plane's engine, or if this is the plane, and again, it's on and moving, he would have been just completely sucked up inside the engine and nothing left. But as you heard in the first news clip, this lady saw police working on him. She saw somebody down on the ground, and he must have passed away inside the ambulance. We never actually see Effinger's family on video, but news tells us that, and they are quoting the family, Effinger's family believes the incident stemmed from a mental health crisis while he was about to fly to Denver to see his sick grandfather. He got held up in security, missed his flight, and those phone calls, I just knew it was coming on. They call it the manic phase. Those just don't end well for him, and this is Fox News quoting Judd Effinger, who would be Kyle's father. Kyle's father supposedly said, obviously, this one the worst ever. So the story concluded with Kyle Effinger was just mentally ill. But this New York Post article continues to say that Effinger was found partially inside a wing-mounted engine of the plane after the manager of an airport store reported a disturbance on the secured side of the terminal just before 10 p.m. that night. The Airbus A220-100 was being de-iced before flying to San Francisco, officials also said, which is odd because we just finished reading that Kyle's father said that Kyle was heading to Denver to be at his grandfather's funeral, and this is what was causing him to act erratic and go berserk inside this airport, and that he missed his flight and he ran onto the tarmac because he was late for this plane. But the article also suspiciously says its engines, the plane's engines, were rotating at the time Effinger was found, despite the airport initially reporting they were off. So again, how is he in the engine of the plane if the engines were on and the blades were rotating? Salt Lake City police and airport workers found personal items, including shoes and clothing, discarded on one of the runways. First responders pulled him out of the engine intake cowling, which directs air to the engine fan section, and tried life-saving measures, including administering Noxolone, but he was pronounced deceased at the scene. The medical examiner's office has yet to determine the exact cause and manner of how he passed away, along with the Federal Aviation Administration, the National Transportation Safety Board, and the Transportation Security Administration at that time were still investigating the security violation and how he passed away. And that was that. There have been absolutely no updates ever since, and we do not know exactly how Kyle passed away. Now, for those that have been subscribed to this channel for quite some time now, you will know that I have made plenty of videos when it comes to planes and people going berserk on planes. One of my theories is that airports, they are a big hub for trafficking, and some of these people may be given things to cause them to go insane just to be taken away and never seen or heard from again. And maybe Kyle was escaping some kind of situation and they caught up to him. Matter of fact, I'll go ahead and link one of those videos in the comment section below, because I've spoken about a woman quite often on this channel, not Tiffany Gomas, but another woman who said she was being trafficked on her plane. And what's pretty bizarre about that video is that there has been no updates to her story as well. We don't even know her name. The next strange story that happened in 2024 wasn't an official news story, but it was still strange nonetheless. It involved a plane crash in Washington, D.C. that never happened. This is also very interesting timing now that I think about it, because this happened about 3 or 4 months before the Black Hawk crashed into the American Airlines plane in Washington, D.C. This first happened back on November of 2024. An individual on TikTok, he was recording the sky because he heard all the sirens, this noise, and he looked up in the sky and he saw a trail of smoke, which he believed may have been coming from a plane.
I do not know what's going on right now. I heard a noise. I come outside. There's sirens blaring, and I see this huge trail in the sky. It's midnight right now, and there's this huge trail like something crash landed. What the heck is that? What is this? I wonder if there's anything on the news about this.
Yo, am I tripping right? Okay, so I'm in Raleigh, North Carolina. Please tell me if anybody saw this. But I was coming back from the gym off of this back road outside of Raleigh, North Carolina, and we're like the road and the trees and the sky opens up. What the? I swear I saw giant sparks, like a plane, like maybe on fire or like, I don't know, but it was like there was sparks across the sky and it left like a huge like illuminated smoke trail like behind it for a long time. And then like 3 seconds later, the biggest aircraft I've ever seen in my life flies right over my truck, and it was completely silent, and it had like 4 flashing lights on it. What the fuck? And then now, like right outside, I'm here for work, living in a hotel, and right outside my hotel, there's like 4 black undercover police officers just like posted up at an intersection. I don't know what the did I just see? Someone please tell me they saw this. This happened like 5 minutes ago, and I can't find anything on it. There's like no sirens. Like, what the?
Now, around the same time that people said they saw something in North Carolina and also heard a crash in Washington, D.C., there was a heavy police presence in Washington, D.C. This is what was recorded. You're going to hear me talking in the video, but that's only because I was the only one talking about this on YouTube at the time. I have been staying up to date on this crash landing that occurred in both Washington, D.C., North Carolina, and I do believe Indiana as well. There's an individual who in the Washington, D.C. area heard something, but he also encountered a very heavy police presence. Now I'm going to go ahead and play his video, but something else interesting also occurred that involves the Washington, D.C. alerts. And I'm going to go ahead and show that after I play this gentleman's video, and I'm going to go ahead and play that video now.
Shh. It's early in the morning on the U.S. Capitol grounds, and man, security and law enforcement is everywhere. Walk with me. Look at this. What is going on? Have you ever seen something like this with Capitol, no police? Man. Everywhere. What's going on? And it's quiet, as if they're waiting for something, expecting something, preparing for something. Look over here. Let's walk over here. Come on. Let's walk over here. Morning. You got all this? What's going on here? Let's go. Let's turn around. Look at that again, man. Turn around. Look at that. Let them see it. What's going on here? Oh, my. I'm going to figure, I mean, it's as if the entire law enforcement force is here early in the morning. I'll get back to you, okay? I'll get something's going on. You got to do some research. I got to see if there's some threats. If there's something big going on in the nation's capital, I'll figure it out. Stand by.
So like I said, we're going to go ahead and go to Washington, D.C. alerts, and we're going to go ahead and look at 4:49 a.m. because something strange happened around that time. This alert says, alert MPD units are investigating a blank in the blank block of blank. Look out for do not take action. Call 911 with event number. Sent to 1st District, parentheses PSA 201-208. Alert DC sent by MPD CAD number reviewer. Even the CAD number is blank, which is odd. Taking a look at the other alerts on this page, you can see nothing else like this. No other alert is blank. You can even see the CAD number on these other alerts. So this one really stands out. What happened at 4:45 in the morning where they are withholding information? Not only is there a heavy police presence on ground, but we also know that there was this police helicopter that was flying over the vicinity of Washington, D.C. as well, making a few circles as if it was tracking something. Before we do get into another individual's video who also experienced something today in Washington, D.C., people are asking why have we not heard any updates from the news and media when it comes to this crash landing? Sometimes the news does not update until Monday, or something big could have definitely happened and they're sweeping it under the rug and trying to come up with some narrative. That's also possible as well. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and play this person's video who also, like I said, experienced something in Washington, D.C. as well.
Minutes out of Washington, D.C. right now, okay? And last night around 4 a.m., the weirdest fucking thing ever possibly happened to me. I've seen UFO crashes, okay? But I was so fucking confused at what I saw. I saw an aircraft that looked like it was just blazing to the ground. And I've never really seen an aircraft this fucking big. You feel me? When I tell you that this motherfucker was huge, and then not even 12 minutes after it just so happened to crash, I guess. I don't know. I heard a loud explosion. All I heard was a ton of police cars in the distance. And I mean a ton of police cars, okay? So I just so happened to go on TikTok because I'm like, I wonder if anybody else is talking about this right now. So I actually tagged him in the comments below. I want you to go check out his video. But that streak in the sky looked exactly like what he's showing in the video. It's weird, man. And there is a couple of people that are talking about the same thing happening in a couple of different states. And I'm not sure whether or not to believe them, but there was a huge comet that was due to come across the night sky that hasn't been across the night sky in over 80,000 years, apparently, this weekend. So I find that kind of coincidental. Regardless, if there's anybody that just so happened to see anything in the DC area, please do comment below, okay?
Now, that individual was Beauty Merc on TikTok, but there were also other people that said they also heard all these sirens and what sounded like a crash in Washington, D.C. And again, it's just so odd. This came only a couple months prior to the crash in Washington, D.C., the actual crash between the Black Hawk and the American Airlines plane. Oddly enough, this also happened a couple weeks before we started hearing all this stuff about drones and the drones over New Jersey, the drones and the orbs. News and media, they would never talk about this story or cover what happened, which is odd because anytime a group of people are talking about something on social media, whether it is true or not, the first thing they will do is release the fact checkers, and no fact checkers were ever released. And around the same time this was happening, people were also reporting they couldn't sleep or they were waking up exactly at around 3 a.m.
Because this crash landing DC thing is really bizarre. And is it affecting our sleep? What's going on? I'm on the East Coast and I went to bed at 10 and I woke up at 3 a.m. like it was time to wake up, even though I feel exhausted, but I'm wide awake. And I was on TikTok watching the guy in Raleigh in his car who saw something in the sky that had lights and had like this fiery tail. So I go to the comments expecting people to talk about what he saw, but there's like several people like, why are we all awake? And everyone was just like posting 15 minutes ago. So then I'm like, no, legitimately, like, why are we awake? And everyone's like, yeah, why are we awake? What is going on? Like, it's one thing to kind of like just be awake, but it kind of feels like I'm exhausted. Why am I awake? And why is everybody on the same page saying that? And evidently there's video from a guy in DC that has like a smoke trail and he hears sirens and stuff. What's going on?
Around the same time that these reports are coming out that something crashed in Washington, D.C., there was a Metropolitan Police copter that was tracking something in Washington, D.C., and it was flying back and forth. You can see it circling around. So what exactly is going on here? There were never any news reports, never any fact checking. The only people talking about this were people on social media. And again, 4 months later, there was a real crash that happened in Washington, D.C. But in any case,
Kofi, follow me.